And we're here to continue with our budget prep for fiscal year 2021. And first on our agenda after this roll call is public comments. I might add, I appreciate all that have come in on the North Government site with comments. Quite a number of them. I've had, I would count 10 anyway, talking about middle school sports, need for that, and need for both the math and literacy specialists. So just a preponderance of that over the last few days since our last meeting. So I will open it up for public comments. Christine, if you can help just recognize who might be on. And I would ask that they acknowledge who they are, identify themselves.
Okay, so if you're on the phone, you're going to hit *6 to unmute yourself. If you're on a video, if you could turn your video on so that I can see you and maybe give me a little wave so that I know that you have a comment. So we're going to go start with Brett.
Hello, Brett Mastriani. I just want to address the board on two things to start. Regarding the RISA account that has been brought up before, I looked through some old minutes and it looks like this has been going on since 2012 when Bob Testa at the time actually asked for the remaining of his unspent budget to be put into an account. And the town attorney was going to look into it. That's from June 27th, 2012. Again, in July of 2012, the Board of Ed requested that account again, and it was deferred with no recommendation at the time from the Board of Finance. I believe, Dan, you were on the board then when that came up all these times as well. And then again, Peter and Bob Testa brought it up again on December 5th, 2012. And the Board of Finance talked about it and debated it a little bit. And it looks like back then it was Mr. Mike Ergo was on it and Dan Spring as well. And there was no resolution at the time, and it says it will continue to be discussed at future Board of Finance meetings. And then again in September of 2013, it was brought up again to establish it, in consideration for and against establishing the RISA account were heard, and it said would be taking under advisement of the Board of Finance. And I know it came up again this year. So I'm just asking the board if you guys can actually talk about it. I know it said it was going to the town attorneys, but I'm not sure why the town attorney has to be quite involved with it, as I believe listening to some of the Board of Ed meetings that their attorney has looked into it as well. But either vote on it and put it to bed, or some kind of resolution should be done when you see that it's been happening and coming up since 2012. And I think this is a year that it would be crucial because of everything that's going on. The town voted for that money to be used for education. And reading through these documents, it shows that the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed would still have control over that money. So they would have to come through the Board of Finance to use it. But this is a year where it would make the most sense to actually try to put that in place because of that money that might be left over. So I ask that you really look into that, and someone maybe make a motion at one of these meetings to approve it to move forward and then come up with the details. And the last thing is the firehouse. I saw in minutes from over a year ago that you were going to look in, well, the selectmen were going to look into full-time fire staff and put a committee together. I know that that just recently happened, but that was promised in February of last year. So I know they're working on it, but one thing I might recommend there is maybe it's time for that part to go to a town referendum and let the town decide if they really want to fund a fire department of full-time fire members separately than in the budget. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, just a quick answer to both issues. One is that though the RISA account was debated from time to time, there was just on the Board of Ed side some change of leadership along the way, and that as it was first brought up, there was a strategy to continually fund the undesignated, which was at very low levels, and that having the surplus come back to the unassigned was actually part of moving the town forward with a stronger balance sheet. So that's the answer there. And yes, there could have been a motion, but at times it either was not carried forward on the Board of Ed side, or we were awaiting more information from attorneys. I think we've made a commitment to take a hard look at it at this time. But in early years, we were more concerned about building the unassigned. To the per diem firefighters, I mean, the Board of Finance listened to that and has gotten the letters, but that really was a presentation to the administration of the government, the Board of Selectmen. And I think they vetted it and do have a committee in place now. So I think that also is an issue that's going to move forward. So, next.
Okay, so does anyone else have public comment at this time?
Okay, any?
Yes, this is John Murphy.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to touch base once again with the Board of Finance members on the effect of the coronavirus on the economy and the state budget shortfalls, which I feel will trickle down to the town. We're lucky this year that we have our tax collections exceed target. We've already got our LoCIP and our town aid road and the ECS, but we don't have $294,000 plus in casino revenue. And we're not likely to get revenue when the casino is closed. So I want you to keep that in mind about using the surplus, is that surplus is going to, because of the economy, the surplus is going to dwindle on its own. And I think we really should hold expenses at a 0% increase. 20% of the state's population is unemployed, and I don't believe North Stonington is immune from that. We have children that wait in line every day for meals, just like the rest of the state and their food pantries and so forth. Quite a few families are on the school lunch backpack program through the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center. We're not exempt from this economy and how it's affected. The effect on the virus has on this economy is probably, and I've heard that it's 10 times worse than the last recession that we saw. That's all.
Sean, I just want to tell you, we have not received any communication from the state regarding that third payment for the casino revenue. So we don't know that we're not getting it. So don't say that at this time, please.
I'll say it. You're probably not going to get it because the casino has been closed. And the
Again, we
state
have not gotten that communication from the state.
The state is $900 million in a deficit and projected to be a $2.3 million shortfall next year. So the numbers you have in revenue for next year are not likely to materialize.
I think you bring up a good point, Sean, but you also say that, okay, we don't know, and we don't know at this point. I think that the governor has talked about opening up the state in a phase scenario as of May 24th. And I have not heard anything relative to that. I mean, whether or not it does happen, I don't know.
I admire the town of Stonington. The Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen have taken the initiative to revisit their budgets and come back lower because of the economy. And I don't think the town of North Stonington should turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, I think the town of Stonington is certainly different than the town of North Stonington in terms of its tax base in particular. I know that they had a very modest increase as they brought the budget forward. That there was a turn back from the Board of Ed of 350,000. But I didn't do a drill down to say, I would estimate that that probably was going to be a large expenditure. That, was going to be easy for them to say, okay, as we have talked, let's take those out of the budget. So, I hear you. I mean, and I understand what they're doing there. They did come forward with a very modest increase to their budget to start. So,
We shouldn't be using the what you want to call a rainy day fund because we shouldn't use it for excess expenses.
okay, well, the rainy day fund actually, is there as being unassigned and at a level of discretion to the Board of Finance. And I know you were on the meeting last week and there was a motion that passed the utilization of the unassigned at a limited dollar amount. And that was $225,230, I think. So, yeah.
That's kicking the can down the road.
But Dan, this is Paul.
Sean, you have been part of the administration of this town. You and I have worked together. And I think as all of this began for me back in 2010, no one was listening to me in terms of building up the unassigned and why we had to do it. And we are only there at this point because there was a strategy implemented by the Board of Finance.
Dan, can I comment,
And
please?
you had first selectmen that didn't spend every dime of the budget.
Paul, you have a comment? Thank you,
Yeah.
Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know last week we did vote as a committee to spend the money out of the unassigned with the caveat that it would come back and be repaid. Just wanted to get that out there for everybody's memory. I think everybody on the Board of Finance recalls that, right? So it wasn't like it was going to be gone and gone forever. It's coming back with funds that aren't going to be used for the different departments.
Yeah, I'll say it, I am concerned about where things are going relative to this pandemic. But I think the Board of Finance has been both prudent, judicious, and forward-looking in terms of bringing the fiscal profile of the town forward from where it was coming out of 2008 and 2009, which was pretty dire. And even at that point, we didn't know what was going to happen in the next year, did not, or the year after. The banking system literally collapsed. And yet we had a plan in place, moved ahead in a very prudent manner, a very strategic manner. And I think a lot has been accomplished for the benefit of the town since 2010. And that thinking remains. We don't do things lightly, that we try to weigh all possibilities as we move forward. All right, Paul, you're all set, you're done?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that was out there, that the money is coming back, and we voted with only that in mind.
Okay, any other public comments?
I have a comment, Dan.
Yes, please, Pam.
I was just wondering if you could read the motion that Paul just referred to from the meeting minutes.
And were the minutes in the packet that you recently sent? Ann, you're on mute.
Yes, they are in the packet I sent.
Okay.
The motion was made by Mike Anderson to authorize the Board of Finance to take $225,232 from the undesignated fund to cover the revenue gap.
Okay, and that to continue, there was discussion The vote was 5-1-0. And there was a consensus that the money be put back to cover the withdrawal in the minutes.
Dan, if I may, but that was not part of the motion, correct? That might be the intent of the vote, but that was not part of the motion, correct?
The caveat for the money to go back was not part of the motion.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I would. So again, everybody, this is the time to speak up. For those that voted yes, that was the intent. If there needs to be a new motion, we'll make it here tonight. Thank you, Pam, for bringing that up. But if you guys, whoever voted yes, I think I heard each and every one of you say that it was, you're voting yes with the intent of the money to come back. So that might change people's vote if that's not what we're going to do.
Yeah, and this is the first time we've seen the draft minutes, yet to be reviewed and approved. So if the wording wasn't as it should have been, that can be corrected this evening.
Thank you.
sir.
Any other public comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to agenda item number 3, which is the continuation of our budget review and preparation. And as we left the meeting of a week ago, the biggest piece that we were discussing was the Board of Education budget. And motions had gone back and forth, both for a 2.1% increase to their budget versus a 2.85. There was an impasse, neither budget passed. Now, since then, and you would have just recently received this information, the Board of Ed went back and amended their proposed budget to the Board of Finance, coming in at a 2.5% increase, which was approved by their board, which would retain middle school sports and the 2 specialists, both math and literacy. So that would be a $49,656 increase over the proposed 2.1% budget. And Christine Wagner is on, and she's happy to answer questions relative to the Board of Ed's submission. Christine, do you want to add anything at this time?
Yep, sorry, I can't start my video, so I'll just do it this way. Are you able to start my video for me, or that's fine, I don't need it, I guess. Yeah, so we met on Monday, we went over it, we understood that the Board of Finance was not going to move us forward. Hold on a second. Thank you. Was not going to allow us to move forward with the 2.85, so we took another look at things that we thought we might be able to cover at the end of this year. Instructional supply was one of them. Our concern, of course, with taking instructional supply out is now it's out. It's now in a lowered line item for next year. And getting, as we're finding, getting any line items back in is really difficult. Transportation, we thought with the lower fuel costs that we're experiencing right now, we might be able to see some savings with fuel there. There's a couple of different line items of thought there, but we're going to kind of move forward with that line of thinking that we could have some savings, at least in the beginning part of the year. So we cut that by $21,400. And we also cut all out of district workshops in the thinking that teachers may be able to get some of that PD and workshop work virtually. So that was another $6,400. I did send you the entire list of cuts because it's significant. So, we had a lot of conversation about it. Again, our technology line is 0 for next year. Knowing what's going on with distance learning right now and the kind of new normal that we're going to be experiencing on the school side, we have no idea what the fall is going to look like. We're waiting for, everyday constant updates, changes from the Department of Education, from the governor, those kinds of things. Technology is a big deal, and we now do not have it in our budget. So we will do our very best with year end to fund all of those things on that list. But this is where we're at. We got a lot of email, a lot of conversation, a lot of feedback from taxpayers that do not want those programs cut. So at this point, we went forward with the 2.5, and we're asking that the Board of Finance take it to hearing to let the taxpayer weigh in.
Thank you, Christine. Dan Smith, I saw your hand raised.
Christine, could you just enlighten me a little bit? Wireless networking, is that an upgrade to the current system, or is that an additional system, or is it a brand new system?
I'm not sure if Greg is on the line for that. We usually have to have some repair work done to them. I know we had some brand new wireless networking, obviously, at the new school, but we also have wireless networking at the Board of Ed side. I don't have the answer for you, Dan. It's a good question. I know it's in the budget. I can find out for you. It's not an unnecessary thing, or we wouldn't have had it in there, but I can get you the answer.
And I get that. I'm just saying that we have two basically brand new schools, and with the technology age that we're going into, you would think that would be a normal networking function, that they would be putting a wireless network into both schools.
Yeah, it may not have been in the budget for the building project. I'm not exactly sure. But I will find out for you if that's okay. I'll get an answer back to you on that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and it could have come, Christine, as you'd offered, from the administrative offices, which is across the street in what was the old Wheeler High School and middle school. All right, Christine. Any other questions relative to this new submission by Board of Ed? Carolyn Howell, I see your hand up. Carolyn, you're recognized.
I just was unmuting. So Christine, I was just wondering, where do we stand at what you think the savings are? Do you know any more at this point? I mean, I know before.
Yeah, as of the March financials, we were at, hold on one second, I can get you that number.
243,000.
243 is where we're showing, where we're trending right now. There's a few things still obviously up in the air. We've got a lot of things out still that we're not quite sure of, but that's about where we're trending right now.
So you don't have the final numbers for April yet?
No, we don't get our financials till a couple of weeks later. What typically will happen is we'll get a first go around at them at our first May meeting, and then we discuss them. And that meeting will be May 13th if any of you want to jump on and participate or watch. And then at the second meeting is when we approve our financials after all of our questions have been answered.
Yeah, I did speak to your business manager, Christine, Deb Martin, just to make the inquiry. And she said that the April P&L was not complete, that there were still invoices yet to be logged in and paid.
Right. It does take some time.
It's only 5 days after the end of the month. So.
Right. Yeah, really business days, it's been 2 days, just a couple of business days. So yeah, we give them some time to process that.
Yeah. I think what she did have to say, and I think you're saying the same thing, is that they're very conscientious about wanting to work towards maintaining that savings amount and tightening wherever they can relative to closing out the year. And that, I guess officially, it's been said that the kids are not going to be going back to the school to finish up the school year. I think we all knew that, kind of assumed that, but that's become official here this week. Yeah. Paul Simon being recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, is this the monies that we're looking for to come back to the to the undesignated? Is these extra funds from the Board of Education? Is that the target?
Sure. It kind of ties into what we were talking about with Sean earlier, that, we look for surpluses to be brought back into the unassigned. And we would hope that we see a good portion of that come back to the town. And we also expect to see some savings on the general government side. And I don't see Mike Ergo on, but he talked about that at the last meeting. an example there would be, and it would, he's on some anticipation, is on the highway department. We were very fortunate to have a very, very mild winter that led to a lot less overtime than what we've seen historically, and use of materials. So I don't know if you have something you want to add to that, Mike, now that you're on. Mike Urgo?
No, you covered it.
Okay.
Great. So just to keep harping on this topic, is the Board of Education's chair, do they understand that those monies should be coming back to help cover some of the shortage in income and the expenditure increases?
Can I
Think
answer
they're
to
all-
that?
Yeah, I hope
Yes.
so. I really hope
Sure.
so.
So that money has been marked for education. And our education line items for next year have been cut significantly. We have no money for technology. We have 70+ laptops out in homes right now that were 6 to 7 years old and will probably not come back functional. So at this point, I am not going to promise that we're going to make up your deficit on income with education money. I don't know how it's going to look, but right now we are looking at saving programs, saving sports, doing the best we can with what continues to get cut. And so we are going to look to use money that the voters already flagged for education to the best of our ability.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to get that out there. I didn't think we had really an understanding or an agreement as to how those monies would come back. So it's a good part of tonight's discussion. Thank you, Christine.
All right, anything else relative to that issue? Okay.
Oh, there's Mike.
Mike, please, Mike Anderson.
I mean, I think with the cuts that they've had to make, I'm going under the assumption that there's going to be very little money left over. They're going to, or we use the risk, they get that risk account and the money goes into that. And if we don't want to do that, then I have a feeling that they're going to need to had to cut out their budget for critical things like the technology, that they're going to use those for the education. I mean, I think we need to assume that there's not going to be much money left.
Paul, did you want to come back in on that, Paul?
I did. I think Mike was one of those voters that said himself that he's okay with the money coming out of the undesignated, with the caveat being that it was coming back. Now, if there's other pools of money that might make up the $250,000 that we're going to be spending, that's great. Doesn't need to come back from one bucket or another, but just, I think we really need to ground on this, to square on this, to say that, yeah, this money is coming back, and that's why we voted yes. And I'm not sure that I'm hearing it yet.
The only response I could give to the discussion is, and having done this for as many years as I have, we just started May, but certainly as we get through the next 30 days, we have a very good view of what the potential savings will be, both on the Board of Ed side and on general government. Yes, Mike.
I mean, I think it's a little naive to say that we're going to be able to replenish that $225,000 shortfall right away with money that's come back to us. I mean, obviously, anything that Board of Education does a great job, and so does the Board of Selectmen, of trying to give back dollars. I think we have to look at the big picture here and see, we are looking to try to generate a revenue stream with, the school of choice that can be used to replenish the undesignated fund. My pledge, Paul, is to use, whatever powers we can in increasing revenue, whether it be by the reval or school of choice, to replenish that $225,000 as soon as possible. That's my pledge. I mean, I don't want to use the fund. I'm a big believer in how much it's benefited our town, particularly in getting amazing financing rates. But I do believe that we need to do that to prevent a huge mill rate increase from overburdening our taxpayers. It's their money and that's why they should be able to use it. And I think this whole board will work as hard as they can to get that money back in to the undesignated fund as soon as possible. And I think we have to approve a Board of Education budget that has the programs and has the middle school sports in order to keep us on the track of being a school of choice for 2 to 3 towns that can generate a lot of money over the next 4 years.
Any other comment? Christine Wagner again.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to, I just wanted to tag on that. We are, Preston does have us on the agenda for School of Choice on Monday, if anybody's wondering where that's headed. Their Board of Education just, I think Preston just voted in a 4 on their board budget for a education increase over there. So they're anticipating having some higher needs for tuition as well. But we are on the, continue to be part of the conversation. We're actually on their agenda for Monday.
Great, thank you, Christine. Yeah, I think, it's been talked about in a couple of meetings, this School of Choice initiative. And it's beyond the concept phase. This has been introduced to other districts where there's been very active conversations. And as the chair from the Board of Ed has mentioned, as others, that the reception has been very positive. So, there's no contracts in place at this point, but it's not that this is conceptual. It's moved down the road from that. Carolyn Howell.
I just want to say that, I took the weekend to review a lot of documents and information. And one of the documents that I reviewed over the weekend was the Board of Finance handbook. And one of the things we should consider are streams of revenue, of which a school of choice would be. So, I don't want to be the one, if we have an opportunity to generate revenues for the town, to not make that happen. But that being said, when I was looking at the town website, because I wanted to look at the contracts the teachers negotiated last year, or didn't negotiate, whatever you want to call it. The one that's posted on the website, the last one ends on June 30th, 2021. But when I reached out to our chair to find out, to confirm that that's actually when the contract ends, it appears that it doesn't end for a few more years. So when they renegotiated, they extended their contract, but I don't know what that is because it is not available to read online. I could not find it anywhere. And personally, I don't want to keep having these conversations every single year, year after year. I was asked to run for the Board of Finance this year. I was not planning to, but as it is, I have a 6-year term, so I will be sitting in the seat for the next 5.5 years. And I think we need to have an ongoing conversation about long-term, I'm all for supporting education, but we also need to be able to work together and have these open conversations about what the needs of the students are, because the schools are here for the students. They're not here for the teachers. They're not here for the taxpayers. The schools are in town for our children and the students, and that's where our focus needs to be. We need to give them the tools that they need. We need to give them the support that they need. They need to have electives and sports, but we also need to control our costs. And part of doing that is all of us working together on the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Education. Regardless of what the contracts say, we have to find a way to make this work for everybody. So that's just my thoughts.
So I'm not, this is Peter Nero. I don't have video. For some reason, I've been turned off, so I apologize. I can't raise my hand to be seen by Christine. So if I can, just to let you know, the contract that you looked at was the administrator's contract that ends in 2021. And you have someone that represented all the contracts in the last 5 years who's a member of the Board of Finance. The teacher's contract runs out on June 30th of 2020. and it'll be a 3-year contract. We have no contract and cannot have any contract in effect that it goes beyond 3 years. None of them. None of them are. So the one that you looked at was the teacher's contract, excuse me, the administrator's contract, which ends next year. The teacher's contract ends in, well, 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Okay, Peter, you jumped in. Christine wanted to be recognized, and we'll go to Christine Wagner. You're on mute. We can't. hear
Okay,
you,
can you
Christine.
hear me
There you
now?
go.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, that we didn't renegotiate a contract before it was up. And then the other thing is, you know, the whole purpose of the Board of Education is to do what's right by the student. Every decision we make, every conversation we have, every meeting we talk about, it's always about the student first. Always, 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 always. The students always come first. Their education comes first. I have asked Dan to maybe put a liaison from the Board of Finance to come to some of our meetings to hear some of the work that's going on. The strategic plan work we just came off of is all about student first. When you see the strategic plan, it's impressive. It's taken 18 months to put it together. Feedback from people from the town, from students, from administrators, from teachers, from everybody in town. So I would like it just to be really clear how much work the Board of Ed is doing. That's what we do. That's what we do. That's what we're here for. So I just want to make that clear, and I welcome any of you to come to any of our meetings, to come to anything that we do. We do workshops on Saturdays, but the students' education is always first.
I just want to make it clear, I'm not criticizing the teachers. All I'm saying is that the bottom line is there's only so much money, and we have to make sure that what we have is sustainable. And if you're talking about contractual obligations, you know, benefits and salaries, it's something like, if there's opportunities to, you know, combine roles or, you know, reduce expenses in somewhere, because you know that your expenses for the following year are going to increase by a certain amount because of your contractual obligations. I'm just saying that that should be taken into consideration so that we don't find ourselves in the same situation where I have all these middle school parents upset, you know, that the Board of Finance is going to cut their middle school sports, because that wasn't the case at all. And I don't think anybody that was sitting on the Board of Finance said that it was a good idea or that we should even do that. So I think that's misleading when that information gets put out there that way. I'm all for sports and I'm all for supporting the students. I mean, but obviously we have other needs as well. So I'm just asking that, you know, we all come together and work together to make it work for everybody. That's all that I'm asking.
A couple of things, you know, with your input, Carolyn. One, you know, as we meet as the Board of Finance and I talk about the responsibilities of the Board of Finance publicly, I always mention the revenue side, that we have to have an eye to the revenue side. And that is not something new. That's something that I have stated over and over and over. And so I do have a sensitivity in terms of, okay, if the school of choice initiative can work, it is going to be a ongoing revenue stream for the benefit of the town and, you know, potentially the Board of Education, you know, all in total. I think that, yes, you know, contractual increases are going to happen from year to year. In terms of getting a deep dive on the negotiations, you know, the only that I've heard, and we didn't get a lot from, in terms of the deep dive from Paul, I know he sat on the negotiations, but I think there was a level of satisfaction with how those negotiations went. I also would add, you know, trying to kind of build on what Sean Murphy says, you know, depending on the continuum here of this pandemic and economic shutdown, you know, it may come to pass that statewide and nationally that a lot of these contractual agreements would have to be relooked. And, but, you know, that's a little bit off the track. I mean, I don't know what happens there. All that being said, because of your interest, would you be interested in making the commitment to be the liaison for Board of Finance to Board of Ed?
I would be willing to do that if the meetings can be set. You know, I do have other obligations. I do have other things that, you know, I help and volunteer with. So I'm willing to do that as long as, you know, it can be flexible as to, you know, I'd have to work it around my work schedule along
Okay,
with.
I know this is kind of new and fresh, but I'm going to take it as a yes for now. And if you should decide here in the next meeting or two that it couldn't work for you, let me know. But I appreciate that. Thank you. Excellent. Any other comments from data we've heard to this point? Mike, please. Mike Anderson.
I'm on a couple boards, and but if Caroline can't make a meeting, you know, she just let me know and maybe I can make it. I'll volunteer to do that if, you know. if
That
she-
makes it workable. Great. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Okay, in response to the work that the Board of Ed has done in amending their budget proposal brought to the Board of Finance, I would like to make the motion that we approve the 2.5% increase to the Board of Ed budget for fiscal year 2020-21 as presented this evening by the chair, Christine Wagner.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor with a second, Mike Anderson. And any discussion?
Yeah, please. I mean, I don't see how we can go forward with this motion until we figure out how we're going to replenish that money. That was really at the crux of what we discussed last week. So I think that has to be sorted before we can even bring a 2.1 forward or a 2.5 or a 0.5 at this point. We have to sort that out first before we can vote on how we're going to spend money.
I don't have clarity on your point.
So last week,
So maybe I missed the very beginning of what you were saying.
that I think we need to swear on how we're going to return the $250,000 we've taken out of unassigned to close the budget gap before we approve anybody's budget. So I think we said we're going to take money out to help pay for stuff. And we all said that, yeah, it's okay as long as we put it back with the monies coming back to us this year. I'm hearing the Board of Ed that isn't necessarily aligned with that thought. The Board of Selectmen, we haven't heard from them yet. So I'd love to know how we're going to get back the $250,000 before we can approve someone's budget for the next fiscal year. I'd love to hear from the other Board of Finance members that might have voted
Dan
that way.
Smith has his hand up.
Oh, great.
I have to agree with Paul on that. We need to set up either a schedule or how we're going to be able to repay that money. Either when, you know, the school of choice goes through, we take a certain percentage. We need to set up something as a mechanism to put it on paper. First thing that happened tonight, somebody said, well, it wasn't a part of the call of the motion. We need to get it official somehow on paper.
In terms of how it was drafted in the minutes, that's not how it read. So because it's a draft, we have an opportunity, because it was stated, everybody, you know, heard what was stated, you know, the wording can be amended as we get to that amending or approving previous minutes. Carolyn Howell again.
I agree that we do need to have agreements in writing because unfortunately, there's a lot of things that we've been talking about for a very long time. And if anyone read the first selectman's statement from last week, there was false and misleading information in it regarding the paid per diems. I know we're not on that subject yet, but I'm just curious, like, is there a rush? Like, why do we have to make a decision tonight about this? I'm just asking. I'm not opposed if we can all come to an agreement, but I'm just wondering, is there a reason that we're rushing this? Dan?
My response to that, and you've said that in the last two meetings, Carolyn, where we actually are meeting with a sense of responsibility to bring a budget forward. So we could meet every meeting with us saying, there's no rush, there's no rush, there's no rush. I don't think that is the level of responsibility we need to bring to the situation.
Okay, so my other question would be then, so if it is urgent, how do we know that the townspeople will be able to vote on the decision and the budgets that we put forward? I feel very strongly that the taxpayers should have a right to vote on whatever gets put forward. And that's my personal opinion. I think a lot of people sacrifice a lot so that we have a right to vote. And I think that we should honor and respect that right, because that's their voice. I mean, I know we represent people. However, I think it's best if it's possible for the taxpayers, particularly if you're going to increase the taxes, that they be able to vote and show their support or not.
Okay, so I find your last comment a little bit in contrary to your concern of why rush it. I think people want to know where we stand and what the data is and what the implications may be. Then it's up to the Board of Selectmen to set the public hearing, the town meeting, and the referendum. And, you know, we're not outside of bounds here to have the referendum later in the year when perhaps we're outside of the pandemic crisis. We've done it in the past, but it would mean then issuing a supplemental. But we still have to have a budget brought forward.
So if we bring a budget forward, can it be in the call that it go to a public vote so that the public can vote on it? I mean, can we do that? Because I have a real hard time. I mean, I'm reading in the newspaper about, you know, Preston, and it's like everyone hopes to go to a referendum, and then all of a sudden it sounds like they're just going to make a decision on behalf of the taxpayers. And I mean, maybe that's fine if you're going to go with a zero going forward, but I think we would all agree that maybe a lot of people don't want to go there. So, I mean, again, I think the taxpayers should be able to vote. And I guess I'm asking then, if that's the case, how can we make that happen? Because I don't want to turn my, you know, I don't want to send it forward to the selectmen and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we can't vote because the governor says, you know, we can't have a referendum, so we're going to make a decision. Because
Okay, so are you saying that you have been deliberately delaying your
no, I want all the facts.
participation?
And I think that
I'm trying to understand where you're taking this, Caroline. That's all.
I'm taking it to the people. The people have a right to be heard. And we
I
are
think-
doing our job by doing our due diligence, by asking proper questions about where our tax dollars are going, what possibility of money's coming back, and then talking about it. I mean, if the kids need computers for the schools, then we should talk about adding that, you know, having them buy those computers so they have the technology that they need, even if they buy it this year with the funds that are available. I'm not dragging my feet to cause a problem. I'm dragging my feet so that we make sure we make good decisions based on information that is available to us. We're talking about the state having a $900 million deficit, and we're talking about other things that, you know, we have projects going on that aren't complete. And I mean, there's money. We need to know everything that we're dealing with so we can make good decisions. It's not to say that they won't be supported, but it's not fair to make a decision without having all the proper information.
I think a lot of the concerns that you bring up, Carolyn, are in the hands of people like the School Modernization Project Committee, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Ed. You know, so we have to trust that they're doing their stewardship and sharing information that we make decisions on relative to the issue of technology. They, you know, it's been stated, they have an approved budget that they have discretion over as of 2019-20. And if there's savings there that can help pay for some technology, okay, you know, that's the way it's going to be. My point to that, as I brought it up, as we started to formulate all this, is I did not foresee large purchases happening within the budget, because then that dollar amount is carried forward year after year. And I don't think that serves the taxpayers. So relative to purchases of technology, I would say that we've probably talked about it a lot. And yet the authority or discretion of how that happens falls to Board of Ed. And we still have the power of approval. If they want to make the appropriation, they come to the Board of Finance. So,
If the money is in their budget available this year and they can buy the technology that they need this year, wouldn't that make sense? And to take it
yeah,
out?
of course, but you know what they have said,
And if you're talking about trust, well, when someone puts forward misinformation and makes a false statement, then you lose trust, unfortunately. And
well,
so,
and unfortunately, Carolyn, I don't think anybody does that with intent, and I would
Well,
bring,
when
I
it's
would,
in black and
if I
white,
could finish, Carolyn, if I could finish, I think I would bring attention to your letter to the editor, where you put forward false information out to the public.
okay, well, this.
No,
You,
it's a two-way
no,
street
wait.
here, Carolyn.
Okay, well, let me play my recording that was sent to me by a
You
taxpayer.
have the
This
middle
is-
school wing, which is going to be demolished because our research has shown that it's too far gone to actually repair or be of use. And we did have other people in there that we thought about, maybe they'd want to be tenants or something like that, and nobody's interested in it. It's going to come down. And the cost
Point of
for
order.
demolishing it is included in these estimates as well for that. And
No,
then
wait.
central office, well, including.
Excuse me, we're talking about the Board of Ed budget,
I know.
and as opposed to the demolition of the middle school. And we were talking about the demolition of the middle school relative to the resolution brought forward for the school modernization program. So, you know, if there's something else that's happening,
When I brought that up in my letter to the editor, the fact that I was bringing up was that the taxpayers of our town expected that the middle school was going to be taken down, whether it was in the resolution or not. That's what was preached to us over and over, year after year, that this is why we needed to do it. I supported the school modernization. I still do. And if you had to spend money on remediation, that's all well and fine. All I was trying to say is we need to have these conversations because the taxpayers still are expecting the building to be taken down. I mean, yes, if you had a school like UConn come down and say, okay, we're going to renovate and we're going to make it like the Westerly Education Center, that's all well and fine. That's wonderful. And if you could save the taxpayers some money that way, but if not, I think it is not in the best interest to keep throwing good money after bad by having to pay to heat the building that sits empty, which was told to be torn down. So that's what my problem is. I'm not
Carolyn, your problem is, and I'm going to be quite frank, is that you have never understood the full scope of what it's going to take or will take to renovate the elementary school as new. And we knew going in that there was contamination there. And yet we didn't know the extent of it until we start pulling away layer after layer after layer. We've spent over $2 million on demolition and biohazard remediation. That has eaten up a huge chunk that would have been potentially available for the demolition of the middle school. And that in the resolution, the School Modernization Committee had the discretion to complete the project under budget, with the priority being given to the new middle high school and the renovation as new of the elementary school. So there was nothing misled there. And there are minutes of the School Modernization Committee. And also issuance of notification on the town website. And, you know, because I sit on that committee, I mean, the due diligence that they have brought forward to do the right thing by the resolution approved by the taxpayers of this town is applaudable, period.
I'm not questioning the integrity of the people on the committee. All that I'm saying is that the taxpayers expected that the building was torn down at the end of the project because of those statements that the taxpayers sent me. It's a recorded, they sent me the snippet. I didn't go seek it out. I didn't have it. I was at all the meetings. I heard it a million times. So this is information that people are sending to me. I'm not questioning the integrity. All I'm saying is the expectations of taxpayers is that this would have been done. So if we're not going to do this, they need to know it. And
Okay.
if we are going to do it, we need to talk about how that's going to happen.
Thank you,
Any
Carolyn.
question that
Carolyn,
money-
Carolyn, you're repeating yourself over and over.
Because I'm getting criticized for bringing to light the questions that people are asking me. I don't know, so I keep asking the questions.
The point of order, though, Carolyn, is we have a motion on the floor. We have a motion on the floor.
Okay, well, I wasn't trying to be pushed into making a decision without all the information. And like Paul said, you know, we still have discussions. We still have to talk about the Board of Selectmen budget. I don't understand why right now we have to do this right this minute. I thought we were going to have a meeting tonight and discuss all of these things, like the numbers, and not just the Board of Ed final number that they brought to us, which I'm thankful that they reduced their budget.
Well, again, point of order, there is a motion on the floor. So discussion relative to the motion, I'm happy to listen to. Mike Anderson, please. Mike, you're
Yeah,
recognized.
I just, if a taxpayer has a question about the school modernization and the middle school demolition, I highly recommend they come to our meeting, which is on Monday, and, you know, make public comment at that point, rather than this be rehashed. I think the only point that should be involved with regard to that project in this forum is whether or not $40,000 is appropriate in the Board of Selectmen budget. That's the only thing that is relevant to our board. And that's my opinion on that. And as far as the motion and Paul's point, I'm happy to listen to everyone else's opinion on this, but I already made my opinion known that this is a unprecedented time where we have to take this money from the undesignated fund to fill that budget hole in order to save the taxpayers the burden of that mill rate increase. And it is my full intention, and I think the rest of the board, to replenish that as fast as possible. And I think the best method is, again, through building revenue with school of choice and with the reval. So that's my 2 cents. If you want to talk about, you know, your opinions on the 225, I'd love to hear them. I think that's the only thing that we need to talk about right now.
Okay, Dan Smith.
So is the Board of Ed planning on using the school of choice money to pay some of that, or if not all, or however much their percentage is going to be, you know, the undesignated fund portion of it? Because I heard from the board chair, you know, once it goes to the Board of Ed, it's their money. They can do whatever they want with it. Well,
Yeah, what happens though, Dan, is tuition that will be paid to the town comes to the town. It doesn't go to the Board of Ed.
it doesn't go directly to the Board of Ed.
No, it comes to the town of North Stonington, general government, and to the unassigned.
Okay. Oh, so it goes into the unassigned account.
That is correct.
That's why it was in the the Board of Selectmen's budget this year, and they had to take it out, if
Okay.
you recall, early on.
Yeah, I remember that. What was it, 10 students or 12 students that they accounted for?
Yeah, projected. Mhm.
Me personally, like I said before, I know it was in the minutes, but I think a motion needs to be made to correct the wrong from last meeting, to make sure that we're covered to be able to pay that money back. And also, Dan, this is, you know, this is a Board of Finance meeting. You know, there is a point of order where, you know, public comments are in certain sections, and, you know, outbursts when we're deliberating is kind of unwarranted. I know it just happened a little while ago, so could you just remind the folks online that unless called upon?
Yeah, I think they hear that, and what you just said. And as I, tried to bring things back, we do have a motion on the floor.
I understand. I just wanted it to be out there.
Yeah, and I'm, for instance, and I want to keep it to this motion relative to Carolyn's questions on the demolition, school modernization. We have the chair of that committee listening in on this, and I know she's probably cringing that she has not been part of the conversation, but and she's being respectful that we're talking about a motion on the floor at this point among Board of Finance members. Mike Anderson. Mike,
I understand your point, Dan, about wanting to have it in the motion. I just don't see how we can even make that statement in a motion. How do you promise to put it back? I mean, all you can say is that this is, we are using the money to fill a hole. And I think Ann's minutes are spot on, where we all pledge that it is our policy to try to replenish that as soon as possible. I just don't see how you can guarantee that you're gonna what's the timeline on that if you do? And how are you gonna promise that?
Well, Mike, that's why we need to have the discussion about a timeline or somewhere, because the first words out of somebody's mouth this meeting was to pick apart that set of minutes from last meeting. The first, almost the first person that came out there and said it was what was said, how it was said. It wasn't a part of the motion, but people said it, and it was in the minutes. And the minutes were incorrect.
No, the minutes were not incorrect.
Well, Dan was saying that the minutes needed to be corrected.
I made the motion, and I didn't have language in my motion that says we're gonna
Correct.
replenish it. So Ann's
But
minutes were correct.
But if the words are not in the motion and we just said it, well, I'm going to vote for this, but for this, if we weren't putting it as a condition inside the motion, it doesn't really hold water. Dan, can you clarify that a little bit more for me?
Mike Anderson did make the motion, and I think he's recalling his verbiage. I think that's what you're saying, Mike Anderson?
Yes, and I think there might be the clarification of why the question came up right away is because, there's no guarantee that there's going to be any money left from the Board of Ed or from the Board of Selectmen at the end of this year. They have the discretion to spend their budgets. So I think, if you expect them to save any money to replenish that, if that's what you guys want to do, then you're going to have, I don't know how you even do that. But I mean, the point is valid, and the motion that I made did not include a specific caveat that it be replenished from excess funds this year. I wouldn't have done that. I just think we need to use the $225,000, and with prudent budgeting and planning over the next year, 2 year, however, when we get revenue streams in here, we would replenish it as best as our ability, as we have.
So Mike,
Paul Simon?
sorry, Dan, that wasn't your intent when you made that motion. When you said yes, but I want it paid back, that wasn't what you meant when you voted? Mike, you're on mute.
I said yes to my motion.
And
And
you didn't say the words after that?
sure I did. I said, and with the caveat, that we will replenish this.
So we probably need to, and again, I'd be very uncomfortable voting for anything tonight until we.
You lost your vocals there.
Sorry, I think it's the intent of the Board of Education chair to spend those dollars that were allotted for the Board of Ed this year. And there's not a lot of intention of money's coming back. So I'm troubled by that. I could not support any budget that was presented tonight, even though I was pleased that they had voted for one and brought it to us. I'd be hard pressed to vote for anything tonight until we get this information squared with all of us and the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen for that matter. We're just not
Well-
there yet. I'm uncomfortable. with
Okay,
it.
but what do you do about the motion that passed last week?
Well, I think maybe we have to have another motion. I guess that's the way we would do it, right? So we vote again. Maybe it changes the minds of the folks that voted yes. Maybe it changes the minds of the voters, the person that said no, if we get this thing cleaned up. But I think you have a motion on the floor now that we're still trying to sort out.
I would call for the motion to be voted on. And again, the
Dan have her hand
motion,
up? I'm
I'd
sorry.
like to hear from Ann. Ann, what's your opinion?
is there more discussion?
My opinion is that if we weren't going to spend, if we were going to spend the money with the caveat that we wanted it replenished, and we're not going to have it in writing, have a guarantee that it will be replenished, then maybe we wouldn't all have voted to spend the money.
I think that's right.
Where were you expecting that money to come from, Ann?
The excess money that the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen would have at the end of this year from savings from money not spent due to the COVID situation.
Okay, but we don't have an exact dollar amount at this point as to what the total savings will be if they're not through their fiscal year yet.
No, but we have an estimate of savings to date, and I would
We do.
expect those savings to increase.
No, I think that's a fair point, and I would agree with that. It's not a lot of money's going out. There are some, I think we talked about that early on, but to date, I think there was, I have to ask Christine for the exact number, but there was quite a fair amount of money. And if perhaps a new vote, a new motion will have to be when this one's done. No monies are spent after May 6th without some kind of auditing to make sure that those monies are available to us to come back. Maybe that's how the new motion might read, Mike.
Well, I don't know if legally you can tell
Okay.
the Board of Ed that they can't spend the money that the taxpayers allotted them last year.
Well, I mean, I think we'll have to have something like that for the Board of Finance members to be comfortable with spending that money now that this discussion's on, been going on tonight.
You know, let
No,
me
you're not
remind,
even, you're not using the rainy day fund. You're basically
Right,
the undesignated fund. You're basically,
right.
we're gonna hold you hostage and you gotta put that money back. So.
Which is what
it's-
we said last week, right? The money's got to go back. Now,
Yeah,
whether
but-
it's 70% from the Board of, sorry, Dan, or 70% of the monies from the Board of Education and it's 30% from the Board of Selectmen, we can talk about that because that's kind of how the budgets are, the tax dollars are delegated in the town. But yeah, there's a lot of good conversation to happen. But I
Right.
think to vote on something without that being nailed down, I don't see how we can do it.
the use of the rainy day fund or the unassigned fund is at the discretion of the Board of Finance. And the Board of Finance is looking to use those funds to settle a revenue shortfall.
And increases in budgets, expenditures.
You know, we don't have a policy currently that says, okay, we're at 15.3% on our unassigned and we can't go below it. So, the conversation is one where, having done this as long as I have trust in the stewardship of Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed. If there's savings to be had, it will come back to the town or unassigned. I've seen it year after year after year after year. And I think that the Board of Ed has been, demonstrating that there is going to be a savings there, that there is a potential that some of that could be used for a technology purchase. But I also didn't see that on their original proposal, that the technology purchase was going to be $245,000. I mean, just to put a number out there. So, I have to trust that they will be judicious in their discretion in using those approved assets, and that there should be a surplus. I think people would expect to see a surplus relative to the pandemic circumstances. And I don't see that as unreasonable. And do I need a contract with the Board of Ed or general government, to say that, savings should come back to the unassigned? No, we have to work collaboratively, with appropriate stewardship to say, okay, this is what the expectation is. It doesn't mean it's bounded by a contract or something in writing. We have to all work together to do what's right for the town.
So maybe I misunderstood the Board of Ed chair when she stated that her intent is to spend it. And I'm not sure, I want to put words in your mouth, Christina, if I misunderstood. If maybe Dan can recognize the chair of the Board of Ed, I think that the intent is for it to be spent. Was it not?
Christine, I'd be happy to bring you back in.
Are you sure?
Are
You guys are crossing some legal lines here, and I'm getting really frustrated. I've told my administrators to go ahead and leave the meeting. The Board of Ed has complete control over their budget and their money. Our line items have been cut by $330,000 in an unprecedented time in which we have no idea what next year is going to look like. If we have any opportunity to help out our children and help out our students with technology and whatever else they need for a positive, strong education, including sports, including the support staff that we are going to desperately need next year, we are going to use it only if it's wise and only if it's to the benefit of our children. At the end of that, if there's money left over, we would love to give it back to the town. But if you continue to cut our budget without allowing the taxpayer, all of the taxpayers, to come in on a hearing, then that is what's going to happen. And it isn't malicious. It's not to be rude. It's within the authority and right of the Board of Education.
So to be clear, we weren't cutting your budget. We were just reducing your increases. So just to be that language correct, right?
And to that point, Paul, I think that they have been very cooperative in trying to answer that call.
Now, again, I was pleased that they voted on something recently and brought it to us tonight. So that was a step in the positive direction.
And I also think that we were concerned, and this is replowing the field, and we've had this conversation, that we weren't compromising the functionality, the criticality, the programming that has been so successful in our school district, and that there seemed to be a support to the revenue possibility of the School of Choice initiative. Carolyn Howell.
I would just like to clarify that last week when we discussed taking the money from the unassigned fund, that I was under the impression that we were taking this money because we had a revenue shortfall because of the land being taken out of, being put into forestry by Mashantuckets. And so my question last week when it came up was this to make the town whole? Because the taxpayers paid that money, it's their money. And so if we're helping the taxpayers by making the town whole, and with the intent that, yes, it will be put back by the town at some point, whether it comes from the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen, but whatever monies come back, that was my intent, is that it should be put back. I didn't say it had to be put back by the Board of Ed or by the Board of Selectmen, how it goes back, but I think that was my understanding of why we were putting the money from the undesignated fund towards that shortfall. It wasn't, I mean, maybe I misunderstood, but that was my intent.
No, I think you bring up a good point, is that, we look at the totality, and those monies in the undesignated are monies that came from tax dollars, from our taxpayers. And what we're doing is trying to satisfy the totality of serving the town and being, again, judicious relative to the use of assets, resources we have available to us. Mike Anderson. Good point, Carolyn.
Yeah, Carolyn, I think you're absolutely correct. We were trying to make the taxpayers whole with the shortfall that was nobody's fault. And I thought that's the perfect use of the undesignated fund. Can you let me know, was there a time limit that you were considering of when we needed to replenish it in your mind when you voted last week?
No, I wasn't thinking about, I was just thinking that the reason we have the undesignated fund is for emergencies. And we don't know what kind of emergencies we're gonna have next year because the state is in a $90 million deficit right now, or 900 million, excuse me. So, I mean, things are gonna get a lot worse before they get a lot better. And, I don't wanna hurt taxpayers. I think we need to be frugal. But I also want to make it clear that that was my intent, was just to make the taxpayers whole. I mean, it's their money. And if we have a shortfall that we weren't anticipating because of things that was just totally unexpected, then I think that is a fair use of the money with the intent that it would be put back in eventually. I don't know when that would be. Clearly, we're in a state of distress right now with the economy and, with what's going on with the pandemic.
You make a good point.
That's right in line
Caroline.
with my thinking, Dan. So.
Yeah. The primary drive was to cover the shortfall. And these are dollars that have come through tax revenues as opposed to them not being used and adding more tax to the taxpayer. So I think we're being judicious in the utilization of those dollars and that it wasn't seen to be, I think in anybody's mind, excessive. If it was, the motion wouldn't have passed, would have passed. So good point.
Again, it's the shortfall in revenues and the increase in expenditures, right? So I mean, it's not just one or the other. It's the combination of both that makes us have to dip into our savings account. It's not just a shortfall in revenue, that we are asking for increases in budgets as well, and it's to cover that gap.
I think the answer to that, Paul, is that, from the expenditure side that's been brought forward, I think it's been done with a very diligent eye in order to maintain what has already been very successful in serving not only the district, but the residents of this town. And that goes to the general government side as well.
It does. No, it's just to get the whole picture out there. It's just not income coming in. It was also that we were spending more.
Well, the thing is, in that we have built up the undesignated, those are taxpayer dollars and, they
For
can
sure.
be utilized. Go ahead, Mike Anderson.
Just bringing it back to the present motion that's on the floor. They just remind the board that 2 weeks ago, we asked, we had a discussion, Dan Smith, I think was the one that brought it up, that it might be a good idea to have the Board of Selectmen cut out the 108,000 from their budget so we could do these, provide the Board of Education with the middle school sports and the literacy aid and the math specialist. So I think, and the Board of Selectmen heeded our that discussion and did so. And now I think, we should be giving the Board of Education the budget that provides those three crucial pieces. Because I think that was the Board of Selectmen's intent in doing that when we asked them 2 weeks ago.
Carolyn Howell.
I still think that we need to address the fact that the fire service is asking for help. They need help. They're not asking for something that they want. They're actually asking for pay per diem that they need. And I think that we should be having this discussion as well tonight about, you know, is there a way to set money aside even for one, even with the understanding that the selectmen will go through. But I did look at Mike's, or I don't know, I guess it's the selectmen's there, 2019. I printed it offline. It's like their plan of action.
Yeah, Carolyn, relative to the volunteer fire company, we're talking about the Board of Ed right now. I'm
I know.
happy, you know,
Well, I think maybe Mike should withdraw his motion for now, and then we can have more discussions, and then we can go back to it. Because I think this is, like everyone says, it's a whole budget. It's not just the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen, it's our town budget. So we need to make sure that we're covering all of our needs. You know, and I'm very thankful that the Board of Education did this hard work and they came back with a lower budget. I also support, if they need to buy computers and technology, I support them buying it out of the money that they have available this year that they've been able to save because of the pandemic. I don't know how everyone else feels about that, but you know, I think that if they need it for the students, then they should purchase it so that they have it. Because you need technology nowadays. I mean, there's other things that you need as well. But, you know, I'm just putting that out there. I'm not sure how everyone else feels.
Mike Anderson had his hand up first. Mike?
You beat me.
I'm in complete agreement with Caroline on, and I think the Board of Education should use whatever funds they need to use to provide things for the students. And just a point of order, I think Dan made the motion on the putting the 2.5 forward, so he would have to be the one to withdraw that. So that's it.
Okay, Paul Simon?
Just that I would be in favor of what Carolyn started out with, to withdraw the motion to continue the conversation until we get the other bits sorted. But because like I said, I wouldn't vote in the affirmative for anything until we were all pleased where we are. Oops, sorry for the phone.
You know, hearing that, I mean, it's another impasse. So I mean, it's either tabling the motion or withdrawing the motion. And you know, I'm sensing it's going to be easier to withdraw the motion. I would have to tell all of you that I'm disappointed. You know, we've spent a lot of time talking back and forth that, you know, we've asked a lot of the Board of Ed, and I think that they have complied. And they've complied within a context or framework of wanting to be able to support the school of choice initiative. And I think they're well down the road on that. And I think, again, we have to optimize our investment. I've said that before in the school modernization project. And that in previous meetings, the 2.1 increase potentially could have passed, but it didn't provide for the key parts that keep our school district as a differentiator from other school districts. And that we had wanted to continue the support that the successes that district had, our Board of Ed and district has had, which is there in the public record. Carolyn Howell.
No one said that we couldn't vote tonight. We just said we wanted to have some conversations before we voted. So perhaps you could withdraw it and then we could have those conversations and maybe we could vote tonight.
So officially, I will withdraw my motion. However, Carolyn, a point of order. We're talking about Board of Ed and you're going off on volunteer fire company. I mean, how does that serve the discussion? But now that the motion has been withdrawn, I withdrew it. You know, it's open, but you know, it puts us at an impasse here again. Yes, Anne.
I support what Carolyn is saying. I think we have to discuss more than just the 2.5% increase to the Board of Ed. I think there are other parts to it. I think there are other options.
And could you give some definition to that, Ann?
Well, I do not support the 2.5% increase. And as I stated last week, I think with the 108,000 withdrawn from the Board of Selectmen budget, rather than putting that over to the Board of Ed budget, I think we need to relook at the per diem firefighters. I have that as a higher priority than putting the Board of Education budget up at 2.5%. We have repeatedly asked them to come in at 2.1%. And I think there are still some things they can look at cutting that they haven't looked at. I mean, they have 8 custodians, 8. My high school had 3 times the number of students and had 2 custodians. The building was 4 times the size of the 2 buildings put together that North Stonington has. And we had 2 custodians. I think 8 is extravagant, and there's savings to be had there.
Well, relative to that, I mean, as you have stated, we have pressed the Board of Ed to reduce their proposed budget. And we've been getting there. And again, as I said earlier, we tried to have kept it within the framework of them to be able to support not only the successes that they've had, but the school of choice initiative. I have to, yield to their stewardship on line items, and as opposed to the Board of Finance taking over their choice on line items. They're closest to the situation at hand. And I have to trust that their support of line items is as it should be. It's not for the Board of Finance. Okay, let's go through every line item. I think you should, or this is the mandate. You got to take out this, you got to take out that. That's not the role of the Board of Finance. To say, okay, we can only afford this amount, and this is the increase that, we could assimilate into the totality of the budget is one thing. I think as we went back and forth in our discussions is, can you maintain the programs and the profile of the school in order to move the school modernization, school of choice initiative forward? And they came back to us and said, if we're at the 2.1, this has got to go, this has got to go, this has got to go. And if that is the case, then they're saying they don't have as strong a case or profile to pursue the School of Choice initiative, which I think we all have had consensus that it is a potential revenue gain for the town of North Stonington. So the motion is off the floor. And again, we're on budget review and preparation. So any other adds to what has been, again, another back and forth meeting on issues? And what more needs to be brought to the front, to the table?
I would say for me, this is Paul, sorry. For me personally, Dan, it would be that $250,000 plus coming out of unassigned. How does that, what do we all see? What do we all agree on for it coming back? Are we saying that it's a wash? It's to fix the gap in between expenditures and income, which will come again, which we have to keep replenishing for next year? Or do we want to devise some type of plan to then have it come back in? I guess I've asked the question to see how everybody feels now that it's out here in the public eye, to really have that discussion. It would be my intent to hopefully it comes back to us. If if it's not realistic, what is? That's where, you know, I'd be happy to talk some more on that if anybody has some thoughts. It doesn't sound like the Board of Ed is on the same page with that. And I'm not sure if Mike and his team is either, or if there's any dollars that we can even expect. Don't have the answers, just want to talk.
Well, Paul, relative to your sticking point, if I could, term it that, the only way we get
Okay.
there is allow this to drag on till we finally get to the close of the fiscal year.
So June 30th,
That's correct.
before we sort it out. Now, can I ask an awkward question? I mean, if there's $200,000 plus today, there's nothing to prevent Board of Ed's approved budget from being spent. So it would not come back. As is their right, I get it. But if that is what we're thinking would be, most of the money's coming back to that fund, if that's off the table, then where else do we turn? What can we expect from Board of Selectmen, for example? What number is that? I forget what we've talked about. We've talked about so many different budgets, but
Yeah, I think relative to your point, Paul, I have a very hard time, holding ransom on the Board of Ed for the town's revenue shortfall. I have to trust in their stewardship that they will be using discretion on their budget to meet the needs and expectations of the district, but also with an eye, if there are surpluses, there's a responsibility for them to bring it back to the town. And the same goes for general government. We ask them for cuts, they have made cuts. In talking with Christine Diaz and looking at the P&Ls, and each of you should be looking at P&Ls both for Board of Ed and general government. There's going to be savings there. And, they can't tell you specifically what the, dollar amount is going to be until we close out the year.
And Dan, can you refresh my memory? What's the number right now of their surplus right now? I forget what Christine had quoted us a little while ago.
$243,000.
243 as of Cinco de Mayo, +1.
I'm not trying to interrupt, but I know this is a hearing. Can I be recognized for 1 second?
Peter, I'd rather keep you in public comments, which we're coming back to.
Well, I was just going to go over the surpluses that we have given back over the years. So
I think we understand that.
relevant.
I do for certain.
I think that Christine was voted in by the taxpayers to represent the school.
Yeah, the history, I understand it also, Dan and Peter, thank you. But it's really this year we're talking about 243 as of right now, and we expect that to go up. But there's hopefully some monies that want to be spent for hardware and things. Oh, I get it. I'm just writing down some notes here now. So I don't know if now's the time to kind of shift a little bit, Dan, very little, to remind us all what this mill rate increase would be with the 230 coming out of the unassigned, the 2.5 that the Board of Ed has presented today, along with the Board of Selectmen budget. What would the tax increase be to the townspeople in North Stonington, if we may?
0.8 mil,
0.8 mil increase.
0.8.
Yeah, yeah, as I said, 0.8, yes.
Relative to the motion, it's still toiling and moving around in my head. There was a second on the motion, which means it can't be withdrawn.
Oh. So we have to vote on it?
Yep. So why don't we just get that out of the way? I think that, again, it was calling.
Can it
the
be
motion
tabled,
was-
Dan?
Pardon me?
Can it be tabled?
It can be tabled. it cannot be withdrawn. So I also mentioned tabling it, so we can
You did.
table it.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable place to be right now.
All right, so, and the correction is rather than a withdrawal, it's a table
Yes.
of the motion.
Yes.
So with the 0.8 mil increase, it's a 2.8% mil increase to taxpayers. Ish.
Yeah, I mean, if you divide 0.8 by 29.
Yeah, that's all I did. That's all I did.
Yeah.
And if we were
And
not,
why is that important? I mean, just so
it's to me, it's how it looks to the townspeople. I know we had to pay our bills. That's important to pay those debts for the projects. That was in excess of a half a mil or right up against a half a mil, I think, Dan. Again, I'm just, tell me if I'm lying here.
Again, we've got 2.6 mil committed to debt repayment. So we're looking at slightly over a half a mil increase. And again, we're not voting on a mil increase here.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to get it all, bring us,
But
keep the discussion
it also would
fresh.
represent a 2.1% increase in the budget over that of our current year.
Right.
Wasn't the, out of the 0.8 that you were talking about, Dan, isn't 0.26 of that earmarked for the
that's what I
capital?
said.
I think that's what
Okay.
he meant, not 2 points.
Yeah,
I thought you said not 2.6, it's
Yeah, I know.
0.26.
I saw your ears
Good.
perk up. I know what you meant.
Yeah, 0.26.
Yeah.
So we're slightly over a half a mil increase to accommodate things we have talked about under the auspices of the potential of the 2.5 increase to the Board of Ed.
Yeah.
Mike?
I'd just like to just address Ann for a second about, she wanted to earmark the 108,000 that the Board of Selectmen have cut from their budget to the per diem firemen. Like, obviously, I want to support our firemen, and right now that's not in the Selectmen's budget. The one problem I have with your philosophy is of switching that over is that it doesn't generate any revenue to help us put money back in the undesignated. It doesn't, it doesn't provide us with this middle school sports. It doesn't provide us with the two specialists that our town needs. And that the Board of Education, who are elected officials, have said need to be in there. So I don't, if the Board of Selectmen want to, I mean, the Board of Education have already taken it down about $50,000 from where they were, from 2.85 to 2.5. If this board wants to direct the Board of Selectmen to add another per diem fire, 50, put that other 50 that's been saved towards a per diem fireman, then that could be a discussion. But they've already, the Board of Education hasn't used that whole 108. They've used about 50 of it. If I believe I'm correct on that, Dan.
Yes. Yep. Anybody else?
I fully understand what you're saying, Mike. But I personally think that if you continue to hold the Board of Ed to 2.1%, they will find a way to make it work with keeping the teachers, the specialists, the programs. I think they will find a way to do that. They keep coming down after they've told us they can't go any lower.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. This is Paul again. I do hear what you're saying because it was at 2.85 last week, 2.5 this week. That must have been some great work. Monies were found and all programs remained intact. So, you know, without that plan to replenish or to repay those other gaps in income and expenditure increases, 2.1 is a comfortable place for me.
You know, again, you know, we're looking to maintain the integrity of the potential brought forward on the school of choice initiative. And, you know, vacating the positions for specialists, I can tell you, I mean, because I was a chair of the Board of Finance when Peter brought that forward, and that has paid off in aces. And we see that in the results that we have seen in the rankings of both.
Maybe those, again, this is Christine's job. I don't want to step on her toes with this. Maybe there are other areas other than those crucial roles out of the, I forget the staff is 84 or 74, I forget the number, sorry.
And again, Paul, I have to remind you that all of this would go to a public meeting. And as I started the meeting, I had to tell you about, you know, the flow of communications that have come forward.
Yeah.
Asking to maintain the consideration to middle school sports and the specialists from taxpayers, parents, certainly of students in the school, but taxpayers of this town.
And I think there's also another population that might be forgotten, the retirees, the folks that maybe not have kids in school that maybe don't feel that way. So I think there's a couple schools of thought on that.
You know, relative to, you know, volunteer fire company, I mean, I have to trust the due diligence that the Board of Selectmen has done relative to their decision. And they also have put a committee together to, you know, vet out, okay, what should all of that look like? And the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen have been heretofore very supportive of the volunteer fire company. And just in, you know, recent years, the approval of the lease on the new tanker, which is costing the town $70,000 a year as we move forward. To me, that, you know, gives them added preparedness. I mean, there's no argument there, of course.
No, I agree. And the two added firemen, I think, would be a wonderful thing to do. It's needed on days, and they made that clear as well. So a lot of great arguments, great work. It's, again, I think someone said it early on, there's only so many bucks to go around this year. We got to do what we think is right as a Board of Finance, to how we spend them.
You know, to make everything whole, it's going to mean a mill rate increase potentially that, you know, is going to be questioned. And we only know that until we get into a public meeting and a town hearing, a public hearing and a town meeting. I mean, and then you hear the voice of the people. Now, will it only be the 60 or 70 that usually show up? I don't know, but you know, I know I can count on that 60 or 70. Yes, Carolyn.
I was just wondering if everyone received the letter from the chief of the fire department regarding our last meeting. I don't know if I may read it so the public knows what it says, just so they can have the information from the chief.
I thought one was passed to each of the board members. I know I got one, and, you know, I don't know who was on the right side of me. Paul, I think he got one. I mean,
and it,
Mike
I did
Henderson
not.
got one and didn't get one.
okay. I mean, in this letter, and they acknowledge that although they don't generate revenues for the town, they do save the town a lot of money. And their trucks are their tools. I mean, they're asking for help with their manpower. So, I mean, if they're in need of people to do the work. So, I mean, I think, you know, everyone keeps telling me that we have to have a budget that we believe in. And so, yes, I believe in our education budget, But I also believe that we need to have public safety come first. And right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. And even if you can't find $100,000, which I find it ironic because it's so easy to find it when other people are asking for it, even though the firefighters have been asking since at least 1996 when my brother-in-law was fire chief. He's no longer with us, so he can't speak to that, but I'm sure the past selectmen could acknowledge that. I mean, they've been volunteering their labor for 75 years this year. So I think that in good faith, and also for the taxpayers who are elderly or in ill health, especially, you know, to make sure that when someone calls for help, there's somebody who can answer that call, you know, in a very fast and efficient way. I mean, it's just good for everybody. I think that that has to be a part of it. And then I'm not saying that it has to be the whole thing, but they're telling you they need it. They need the help. They're crying out for help, and everything's always getting pushed aside year after year. It's not listed in this document. You know, I went through it, the selectmen's plan. I just need to find what it's called so I'm not misquoting anything, but I didn't see it in here. I mean, unless I'm mistaken, the 2019 strategic plan, which was posted online on May 8th of last year, does not include anything about paid, you know, per diems. It's not on here. And there's a whole checklist. I see it coming, you know, obtain political support for tax credits and, you know, tax increase to fund priority of strategies, implementation of tax credits for new businesses in the community, you know, consider the creation of, it just goes on and on. But I mean, that problem that's been brought to our attention over a year ago is not being addressed. It's being kicked down the road. And we are in a pandemic, and I think it needs to be addressed. And I don't know what it would look like. I mean,
Carolyn, you're repeating yourself at some point here.
well, can
but-
I ask
but-
a question? I'm
No, but
asking.
I'm going to add to what you're saying is that sitting as chair for the last 2 years or 3 years, whatever it's been, when the volunteer fire company has come before us for a presentation, and this is not to be countered, I have asked them, what do you need to bring up the level of your preparedness? I have asked them that. And heretofore, they have not asked about 2 per diem firemen. They have not. And it doesn't mean I don't want to give consideration, please. Doesn't mean I don't want to give consideration to it, but it has not been brought up in previous years, as you have noted. It has not.
It has been brought up in previous
No.
years. Yes, it has. It was brought to the Board of Selectmen in February of last year, and it's documented in the notes that I typed that are posted on the town website for February 27th, 2019. You can look it up. Mike Argo took full ownership of not putting forward that request. It's in writing, in black and white. Those minutes were approved.
Okay, I'm responding to me asking the pointed question to the chief, what do you need for your added preparedness? I also asked, you know, how is that, what's the calculus to your preparedness? Because I know it has a lot to do with insurances and all kinds of things. And, you know, I was curious, as you are, but
It has to do with our homeowners insurance as well. I mean, if you don't have a good response from your volunteer fire company, your MSO rating will go down. There are lots to this, and I'm sorry, they have brought it to the attention. They have been asking for help. I respectfully disagree with what is being said right now.
well, I'm talking relative to what I asked and what I got in the response up to this point. Board of Selectmen is another issue. And, you know, if they felt strongly about it, they certainly would have brought it within their budget.
Well, we have a right to put stuff into the budget. I've been told that by Mr. Gross over and over at our meetings. So I'm telling you that as a Board of Finance member, I am addressing this need, and I think that the town needs to vote on it and make a decision if they would like to support per diems or not. I'm not asking to make a unilateral decision. I'm asking the Board of Finance to put it into the budget so that the town can vote on it and say, yes, we support it, or no, we don't. and just like the Board of Education budget.
Ann Aiken, you're next.
And we put it as a separate item in the referendum.
I'm not sure that we would want to do that. Mike, are you still on the call?
I am.
And Ann Aiken is asking, could it be presented as a separate item on the referendum if we should get to that point?
If we should get to that point, I suppose that's certainly a possible thing that could be done. It is not unprecedented to have separate items on the referendum for consideration.
Okay, so there's your answer, Ann.
Okay. I think maybe that's what we want to do then.
So the Board of Selectmen puts forward the call for the town meeting. And I mean, just to provide a little clarity, I mean, the Board of Selectmen did weigh this. They did not decide to send this forward to the Board of Finance. It is not that we don't hear, it's not that we don't care. It's that we are in the same position that you are, trying to balance all the balls in the air. And you know, yes, it did come up last year in a meeting where it was requested from the Board of Selectmen, and it was an oversight on my part when I didn't recognize that. However, we never moved it to the Board of Finance last year. We agreed to put a committee together. We did drag our feet on putting the committee together because through conversations I had with the chief, we didn't think that was going to come forward this year either. However, I think some different powers that be came to be, and it came forward, and that's okay. It's a need, and we don't want it to go unrecognized. And I just will mention that this committee that we put together has now met a third time. I provided the minutes of their last meeting to the Board of Finance, so you can see how quickly they're working towards potential solutions. And I would certainly not want to undermine their work. The chief sits on the committee, the president of the ambulance sits on the committee, along with 3 other great resident members. So I think the selectmen's, and I know the selectmen feel the same way, that we have empowered that committee and we want them to do the work. And then if they come up with some solutions, we will certainly come back to the voters, even if it means an additional appropriation. But they're looking at a lot of different things with regards to emergency services. And that is the path that we have laid out for this conundrum. And so I would request that, you know, the Board of Selectmen has been very in tune with this issue. We have appointed a committee of volunteers in the community to look specifically at this issue, and that the Board of Finance should allow the Board of Selectmen and the committee to do the work that we have asked them to do.
Right. Just for clarity, and I know the answer, Mike, but for the others on Board of Finance, that there are per diem members on the ambulance association, correct?
Yes.
And the ambulance is also paid, where our volunteer firefighters are that volunteer.
Okay, but I wanted to make it clear, Carolyn, because you keep bringing up emergencies, COVID victims, bee stings,
So,
whatever.
Yeah, and you know, our
I'm
ambulance-
finishing. Could I finish, please? That we do have per diem people on ambulance service. We do.
Yes, we do. And we also have firefighters who are EMTs who also run per diem calls for the ambulance. And there are times where the ambulance doesn't have enough people to respond to the calls. So there's a whole bigger issue here. All I'm talking about is if you have paid per diem firefighter EMTs, they could respond to a fire or a medical emergency. They're currently responding to medical emergencies, and I wish that everyone in town would know how many emergencies they respond to, and they would have a far greater appreciation.
Okay, what I was doing, Carolyn, is just bringing clarification relative to a medical emergency. We do have per diem individuals, which you did not bring out as you had spoke about the situation.
I understand that they do have them, but they aren't always scheduled. There's times when we don't have anybody on the schedule. They don't have people, unfortunately. And that's just the reality of it. And I'm not making this up. And, you know, I give a lot of credit to our firefighters because they've been responding day and night to all kinds of calls, and they're asking for your help. And this is my point. They've been asking and asking. They're tired. They're getting older, and we don't have any, you know, we could set up programs with the school to start feeding new members. And we do have a couple young members, but I mean, this is a real need. This is a real problem that needs to be addressed, and not, you know, the chief submitted a letter. It's right here, everything. I mean, he's a professional firefighter along with being our volunteer chief. So, I mean, that's all that I'm saying, is that people should really heed his opinion and his knowledge and expertise, along with the other firefighters that have been supporting this community. They're next to none.
Well, relative to the two pieces, which is the volunteer firemen and the ambulance service individuals, that we spend a lot of money on both sides. And in years past, and, you know, and you keep talking about what's been brought up in the past. You know, I brought up, why don't we outsource our ambulance service? And then we would have had savings to the town, where it would be very realizable to have per diem people at the firehouse.
It's my understanding that you would have maybe savings in the beginning, but who knows what you would wind up with down the road. So I don't know. I'm not speaking to the ambulance right now. I'm just talking about our volunteer firefighters who are asking for help. They're telling you there's a need, and I think we need to address that need. And whether you say we're going to wait until we get done with the study to make a decision, you know, if that's what the selectmen want to do, that's fine. I'm not opposed to that. But all I'm saying is we can't keep just disregarding this every time we meet every year to go over the budgets, because we have to, you know, prioritize the school over public safety. They're both important. They're both important, and we have to work together to find a way to protect our community and also provide all the services that our members of the community that are taxpayers need and expect.
Well, relative to supporting, you know, the public safety, they have a new building, they have a lot of new equipment. We've tried to bring up the level of preparedness. And you mentioned the kind of the totality of the budget, you know, in terms of the ambulance service. You know, we bought a new ambulance. We just refurbished an ambulance. You know, that could have been outsourced to bring more to the volunteer fire company. I mean, so again, the discussion is one that could be broader than what you're suggesting. So in part, I agree with what you're saying. Mike, I think you were next. Mike Anderson.
I mean, is this something that, you know, the selectmen have not put it in their budget at this point, but that doesn't change the fact that we're going to go to a public hearing and then have a public meeting. I mean, can't we, you know, just hear from the townspeople? If the townspeople want to put it into the budget, I think maybe we need to have a discussion. Let's just assume that the Board of Education's at 2.5, just for the point of discussion. And if you add the $100,000 or maybe add 50,000 to the Board of Selectmen budget, Dan, what does the picture look like for an increase?
Yeah, so I mean, that would be fairly easy. It would put us back, because of the move of the dollars, to a projected mill rate of 0.89.
Versus 0.81?
0.89 versus 0.8.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and at 100,000, is that?
Because we just got $50,000 worth of savings, we're going to put another 50 in to make it 100.
Right.
And it puts us back to
what about
would have been
what,
the 2.85 increase for the Board of Ed.
Okay.
So,
Right. I just want to have a clear picture. Like, if you're gonna present this to the people, now we have to add in another 100,000 to the budget, and what does that increase look like?
Yeah. Yeah. In that Board of Ed just gave us 50,000.
Right.
We're adding 50,000 back in. Just keeping it simple. So it still keeps us under 30 mil. 0.89.
Well, I think that's important for, if we have a discussion where, what I'm just worried about is, say we put it forward, Caroline, with it in the, the budget's going to increase for the Board of Selectmen, that extra 50,000 or the extra 100,000. I don't know how many people want to step up to the podium and say, we don't want to support the firemen, and let's take that $100,000 out. What I want to see is how much support is out there that says, no, we want to add in another $100,000 to the budget for that line item.
I'm not suggesting that we even have to do $100,000 this year, because by the time they get anything rolling, it's going to be near the end of the fiscal year anyways. I mean, like the middle of the next fiscal year before anything could be done, but they're telling you there's a need. So I think even
know
if
that,
you took $50,000 and said, look, we're setting this aside, and we did already talk about having multiple questions on the ballot anyways. We've already discussed that. I think that people need to make a decision. They need to decide what they're going to support, and, and try to meet the needs of where we're at right now in this
Right.
pandemic and during this recession period. And also, with what we need to do for the students, the younger people in our community, and also the older people in our community that are on fixed incomes. I think, we need to do things that work and help everybody. And those are the things, I don't think it's an unrealistic expectation. I mean, I'm not saying that everything's perfect, but I think we still need to have these conversations and decide, yes, we're going to support this, and put it forward to the people for a vote and let them decide. And if they choose not to, and something happens, then you know what? It's on the public. They've made that decision. It's not on us to make that decision of whether or not, the need is there. And if there's an emergency and the need's not met, then you can't blame the volunteer firefighters because they did bring it to our attention. You can't blame the taxpayer. I mean, you can't blame us either.
Okay,
Right.
Caroline.
I don't disagree with you.
Here, Mike Ergo, you're next, and then Mike Anderson. Yeah.
I don't want to speak too much on it, but this committee has really worked hard. It may behoove you guys, if you have this much interest in the topic, to hear from the committee. And certainly I even early on, they've already done so much work. You may want to talk to them. I think part of the thing that has to be thought of, and I hear your committee talk a lot about concerns about revenues in the coming year and kind of the doom and gloom that could be on things, right? So, I hear all that, and I think there's a lot of positives too, and you try to weigh it all, but part of the fact of going to a paid firefighters or per diem or whatever you want to call it is that that is just the potential. I mean, that may just be the beginning of the costs that are associated with that. And so I'm not saying that this is something we shouldn't do or something we should do. All I'm saying, and all the selectmen said, is that we need to do some research on it before we bring it to the people. I've heard from enough people in town that are on all sides of this issue. There's people that think we've spent too much on emergency services. There's people that think absolutely we have to make sure that we have the adequate staffing and the adequate equipment. It doesn't, none of that matters unless there's data to back it all up. And that's all the selectmen are trying to get to, is a place where we have data to drive a decision that we're going to make. And this committee has already done a very, very good job. And so I would suggest that we allow the committee to do the work and not have the Board of Finance come in without at least hearing what the committee's already done. If you have that much interest in the topic, let's have a joint meeting and you can hear what they've already discovered. I mean, I'm happy to do that, but I don't think it makes sense for this board, who's hasn't been part of any of those discussions, hasn't really been part of any of the selectmen's due diligence to weigh in on this. I mean, that's just my opinion.
I think that's fair, Mike. I mean, if there's a committee that has been diving into that potential and has data that we don't have to make good decisions, as Carolyn's trying to bring forward, we should hear from them. Mike Anderson.
I think that's a great idea, and I think that goes to my point of saying, all right, if we do put forth a budget that the Board of Education has provided to us and a budget that the Board of Selectmen has provided us, without those positions in it, that we can hear then in a meeting, meeting next week, hear from that committee, and in preparation of the next town hearing, then we can provide that information in that forum. And maybe it sways our positions, maybe it doesn't. Maybe we can provide more information to the taxpayers so they can provide feedback to us once we have that information from the committee. So I think I'm not saying I don't support you, Caroline, in wanting to put forward that. I just said, let's let the process pan out, and we can do that and still have that discussion at the hearing, and we can always change our minds and put something back in based upon public comment at those two, at the hearing and then at the town meeting.
I can arrange to have that committee meet with us next week. But I mean, just so you have a sense of the totality of the numbers, if we agreed on the 2.5 on the Board of Ed and put 50,000 back in for one per diem individual, we're back to as if we had approved the 2.85 for the Board of Ed, which hypothetically would be a projected mill rate of 0.89. And again, that is sustaining the agreement of the draw from the unassigned of the $225,000.
Right. And we're gaining a fireman.
Gaining a fireman. And you're giving the Board of Ed what they need to pursue revenue potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest goes to public meeting, town meeting, for the voters to weigh in.
Adding the firemen, having some commitment to repay, feeling better about the whole process here.
Hey, Paul, we cannot give you an absolute on the repayment. I think as the responsibility of the Board of Finance, as well as Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen, that we have to be sensitive to the draw from the unassigned and are willing to move to bring savings forward to replenish it.
No, I understand. Just makes
But
you
in the
feel a bit better.
meantime, we're serving the taxpayers with dollars that have been accumulated from their taxation to give us the totality of the budget and meet expectations. And I think not be unreasonable relative to a projected mill rate increase.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing you, Dan, and it's knowing that those guys are all good stewards of those bucks. I would expect to be something coming back, even though we can't nail down the number. I love the idea about being able to get some more services up on Route 2 there in the fire department. So
yeah, relative to the give backs, Paul, and the word trust comes into all of this. I have worked with these people for not 1 year or 2 years, over a 10-year period. And I have not been disappointed with their stewardship and their sense of understanding the totality of the town. And if that had not been the case, we would not be in the fiscal position we are currently, where we have moved that unassigned in the last 10 years below 2% to where it is today. And that's how we got there. We got there through givebacks and prudent management of our budgets. I've lived it.
No, I understand. No, they're kind words for sure. Great, thank you.
Dan Smith, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. So on the general government side, I know they cut $108,000 out for the paving of Kingswood Meadowwood, but is their give back this year, the potential give back, some of the money, if I remember right, serves me correctly, some of that money this year would be, the overages that they have would be used to pave Kingswood, Meadowwood?
Well, and then what you're saying, can we put that back in the budget and not have their surplus?
No, 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 no. What I'm saying is that what,
No,
any,
no,
any
no.
potential,
No, no, the savings that would come forward would be things that have been realized through, I hate to use the underutilization of the highway department because of weather conditions. We've had a very different scenario than what we've had in past years.
okay.
Kristen Diaz, you've got a comment?
Yeah, we may have some other additional savings and some other line items. We may have savings in the Recreation Commission, just because we're not holding some of the programs that we had planned on because of COVID-19. And we may have other savings in other areas that we're just not aware of right now. So we can't necessarily give you a ballpark number, but we are trying to make sure that we do have some give back on the general government side.
The only thing I can tell you is, I mean, I do look at the P&L closely. I do have discussions with Kristen Diaz and her responsibilities. And I feel confident that we're going to see a very nice savings from general government. And the savings can be had from Board of Ed, but we're asking them to make cuts. We've talked about the one-time purchases, which I don't want to see in their budget anyway on technology, because it gives us a big bump that is not something that's going to be repeatable or intended to be repeated year after year. And so to me, it shouldn't be part of the base budget. I mean, simple. Mike Gergo.
I just want to point out, I've been here, we've, under my board, Nita and Bob, myself, we've passed 4 general government budgets since we've been here. In that time, we have, and it's a $5 million budget, we've had only over 4 years' time, a total of $50,000 in increases over the whole 4 years, less than 1%. So we basically operated with a flat budget, and this will be the 4th year. And I don't think people know that, because I hear comments about spending all the time. And I just want everyone to be aware, that's the facts, that's the numbers. And we're happy to do it because we want to be responsible with the taxpayers' dollars. But we've basically operated with a flat general government operating budget for the last 4 years.
Yeah, and Mike, I think you're aware that I have publicly applauded general government in terms of the execution of their budgets, and that it never has been overextended. And I bring it up because it's important that the Board of Finance members know this. Be familiar with our audits. Our audits have been stellar and has demonstrated not only us being concerned about the fiscal stability of the town, but that the budgets have been well executed. In Aiken.
Mike, what was the number again? I did not catch that. What has been your increase over the 4 years?
I can pull it right up for you. Let's see. Can you see my email, or can you see the?
I can see your screen.
Just came up. Mhm.
It's a slide deck. Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yep, 1% per year over
No.
4 years.
1% over 4 years.
Okay. 1% total over the 4 years, so 1/4% a year.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I also would add in there that a lot gets done and morale is good. There's always a sense of team spirit. And again, that comes through good leadership. And look at what the town has accomplished just in the last 5 years. It's been incredible. We've got a new emergency management center. We've got 2 new schools. We have businesses that are coming into town. We have people who are talking about moving their families to North Stonington. And for the people who have been here, if you have watched the emails that have come in on the North Stonington government email system, they fully applaud, what's happened in the school district. And I not only heard from parents, but I heard from a 5th grader you know, and I heard from a senior, and it's just been heartwarming, and it tells me, and we talk about things in field. In the field, we're doing the right thing. We are having successes. If we weren't, what's happening in the field wouldn't be demonstrated, you know, as it is. And for those who have been in pharmaceuticals, for instance, you know, to understand that something works, it's how is it working in the field? Are doctors prescribing? Or, you know, are we getting return prescriptions? And if you are, it's because it's working. And that's exactly what our fiscal management has done for this town. And it's come through a lot of volunteers. Carolyn, you know, I can't tell you, you know, you, myself, all the hours I've put in, I don't get paid for those. I don't expect to get paid for those. But I want to do the right thing, as all of us do, for the town and see it in totality. But also have not only the anticipation that what we do and what we decide serves the town today, but also has an eye for the future. You know, pandemic, financial crisis, whatever. You cannot go inactive. You cannot cocoon. You cannot go dormant. You have to move forward with the thought that even in these crises, we're going to make the right decisions. Any more to discussion? I don't mean to preach to you, but sometimes things have to be said that kind of ties everything together.
I'm feeling a lot more love in the room than right now. I appreciate
I am as well.
You know, and sometimes, you know, Paul, to your point, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but compromise has got to be part of progress toward outcomes. And without that, you don't get there. And I don't mind talking to anybody who has an opinion contrary to me. If they're expressing it, it tells me they've got meat in the pan. Great, let's talk about it. You know, I don't need to build a wall. Let's talk about it. Let's make it happen. Anything else? Wow. It's not coming up on 9:20, folks. I don't sense there's potentially a motion to be brought forward. We're not there yet. I think we've rolled over a lot of data, though, a lot of opinions. You know, we can meet next week. You know, I promised to bring in somebody from what's happening on a volunteer fire company. But I'm telling you, there's a pathway with some sense of compromise in what we've discussed. And it is happening because of the give back in budget construction coming from general government and Board of Ed. Mike Anderson.
I mean, I'm on board with Caroline as far as my hope is that this is going to go to a referendum, because I just want the taxpayers to decide these, you know, the ultimate budget. I'm just wondering if we wait to move this forward next week, are we still within the bounds of possibly getting this done before June 30th? Backtracking, if you could.
Christine, you could probably help me with that, but looking at the calendar, just snapshot, you know, we have to make a decision by next week in order to have the time periods for advertisement.
Yeah, so if you, sorry, I'm just opening up my calendar. So if you moved it forward to a hearing next Wednesday. That would put the holiday on Monday. I think technically, even though it's an online meeting, it's still not allowed to be held because it's a holiday. So we would have to hold it either on the 26th, which would be a normal Board of Selectmen's meeting, or the 27th. And then at least 2 weeks after that would be what the scheduled date would be for the annual town meeting, if you're following a normal schedule.
Okay, so just, we're talking in terms of public hearing versus town meeting, so bring clarity to that for the board members.
Well, the virtual hearing, this year's virtual hearing needs to be held at least 2 weeks prior to when you would have an annual town meeting.
Okay, so everybody understand that? Okay. The public hearing gives us the opportunity to draw out, put forward what the thinking is in terms of the budget construction, and still gives us time to make amendments that then would be represented at the town meeting, that we have responded. And then in that presentation, it moves forward to a referendum. So that's the rationale to this process. So even though we're approving something, we're still allowing the opportunity for it to be amended by input through a public hearing. And then if something comes out of that that needs to be amended, we've listened to the taxpayers, we make that amendment, then represent what the amendment has been at the town meeting. And whatever is presented at the town meeting is what goes to referendum. Dan Smith, I think you beat Mike Anderson.
Hey, Dan, getting back to the school of choice funds when they come in, that would go directly into the undesignated fund, correct?
That is absolutely correct. And, there's no wiggle on that. That's what happens.
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion. The motion read, to earmark any school of choice monies deposited into the undesignated fund to be used to pay back the funds removed to cover the shortfall in the budget year 2020 to 2021 until the debt has been repaid in full.
Okay. The point there, though, Dan, is that anything that happens after that still comes into the undesignated.
Yeah, it comes in, but that money needs to be earmarked to be able to pay it in full.
Okay.
If we don't pay the money somehow, it's going to be on the backs of the taxpayers in the mill rate increase.
I think that happens de facto, but I think what you're trying to do is bring some definition to the replenishment of the 225,000. Yeah,
correct.
So yeah. So what you're saying, Dan Spring, is it comes back there anyway.
correct.
So is this, and I support what Dan's thinking, but is this any more than semantics? I mean, is this really?
What I'm suggesting, there's a redundancy there. The only thing it's doing is giving some definition that is, we're demonstrating to the public at large, that doesn't have the knowledge that we have, that this is something that resets the draw.
And this does not preclude.
Am I explaining that correct, Dan, to your thinking?
Yeah, what I'm worried about is they're going to see the 200 and they're going to see the money be taken out, but the voter is going to want to see a plan in place to repay into the undesignated fund. At least we can say in good conscience that we have a plan in place to repay that money, and it's not going to be coming on the backs of the taxpayer. It's going to be coming back with the revenue, as Mike and everybody in the board sees that this is a potential revenue stream. It's going to come on the backs of the school of choice funding coming into the town.
My point, Dan, would be, I don't think we need a motion to do that, but I think it could be clearly stated in the public hearing and town meeting. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you, and Dan, I was with you there. So this comes back anyway, and this motion would not preclude any give backs by the Board of Ed or Board of Selectmen this year. It's not in lieu of, it's in addition
No.
to.
It's an addition to.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly second it, Dan. I'm just not sure where it gets us, though. I think it would be there anyway. But I'm seconding your motion.
Okay, so we have a second to the motion. Any further discussion? I think you've heard my point. I think it happens de facto.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
But at least it gives some clarity and making sure that, we're not going to be taking money out and then down the road, we're going to say, well, we're going to be raising it another, $500,000 or whatever to be able to get the money back into the account. At least we can say, hey, we have a plan in place. It's going to be coming on revenue into the town. And once that debt has been paid back, the money just keeps on rolling into that account to be spent by the town.
Mike Anderson?
I mean, the Board of Selectmen have to put that in their budget, wouldn't they?
What we're talking about is we have.
I'm not
some
against it.
discretion-
I'm just like,
You
I'm
know,
wondering,
The Board of Finance has discretion over the unassigned. So Board of Selectmen, if they wanted to use unassigned, they have to come to Board of Finance for that approval. And
I
it
know,
may
but the-
mean that we go to a town meeting.
But
It's
the revenue comes into the town
Correct.
Mhm.
and it goes directly into undesignated at that time?
Correct.
Okay, that's where I had
Yeah.
a dis-
And any other revenues, unless, and understand what I'm going to say now. It looks like we did in the very beginning, Board of Selectmen, where they showed tuition coming in as a line of revenue
right.
that we then are utilizing for that budget.
What I'm worried about is,
You understand that?
Right. And we just tell them, you got to take that out of there.
Yeah, at least it's being tracked, so we can say, hey, this year you only got $100,000 and you have to pay 120. Next year you only get 80, or you're paying down the loan, and once you pay down the loan, hey, you're good to go from there on after.
Yeah, and the only thing I see is, the conflict that it is a revenue stream, as we've described, that should be that, even though it comes into the unassigned, and which it does, absolutely, that it could be contrary to it being demonstrated as a line of income, which is what taxpayers would hope to see. Rather than the money just going to the undesignated, if it goes in there, it's in a pool, they're not seeing it, much to your sense, Dan, that this is revenue that actually came in from this school of choice initiative. Do you follow my thinking there?
I do, but I still stand by, we need to have a plan in place to show the voters that we're paying back that money that we were taking back to plug a hole in this year's budget for the revenue.
Okay. Well,
So I guess wouldn't a better plan then be, sorry. to
any
be some kind of
savings or
def-
surpluses?
Yes, sir. Any definition around that? I mean,
Yeah,
isn't that really what we're talking about?
Because otherwise it's getting a little, you're starting to
Yeah.
cloud the revenue piece,
Yeah, yeah.
which is why we're doing some of the things we're doing that we want to have demonstrated.
Right.
Carolyn, you had your hand up.
If the money's coming back, whether it comes back from revenue as a school of choice or revenue because it's monies that were left over from either the Board of Education budgets or the town side, I mean, as long as that money is going back in, I think that would satisfy everyone.
Sure.
I'm assuming, because all we're trying to do is put it back in case we need it for an emergency.
But it seemed pretty clear by the Board of Ed, if they have their money very, like, it sounds like this year, that money's, we're not gonna get any money back from the Board of Ed because we're cutting their budget. Or we're not giving them the increase that they are requesting,
Thank
so
you.
they have to spend the money to cover their shortfalls from our not funding their percentage that they want.
Okay, relative to that argument, Dan, I would have to say we are in a better position understanding their proposed budget at 2.5 than 2.1.
Mhm.
So what if we just say that if the monies come back, however it comes back, that would satisfy that need at that point, and then once you've replaced that money to the fund, that any other revenues that come in could be shown as revenues, like anything in excess of that. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well, the other way that you could look at this is, that, which I hate to do too, because it could handcuff us, is that there is no further draw on the unassigned until the 225,000 is repaid.
That feels like a winner.
All right, I withdraw my motion and I will put forth this motion rewritten.
Sorry,
That-
I think, I'm sorry, Dan, I think I seconded that already, yeah? So
Oh,
can
you
we
did?
withdraw?
Yeah, so it's got to be a
Is that where you're going, Mike?
or a vote
Hey,
down
Paul.
and go to the next one.
Yeah, we're gonna table that one.
Mike Anderson.
I don't disagree with that on principle, Dan and Paul and the committee. Like I think Dan Spring just mentioned, I don't want to hog tie us from, we don't know what's going to happen next year. It's, obviously, that's in principle what we all talked about yesterday is obviously repaying that as fast as possible. I'm a little leery to say, to hog tie us to and not being able to use the undesignated if something happens. We could have a natural disaster next spring that required an appropriation.
But that money needs to get money needs to get repaid at some point.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, so I think
So-
short of natural disaster, I think the point where both Dan's are going is a good one, because unless we have some definition, have it in writing, I'm fearful it won't get paid back. So I like where this motion was going, short of a natural disaster. And then if budgets are such next year or the income's not there and the expenditures are higher, that's when the rubber meets the road, and there's going to be costs, right? There's going to be some severe cuts, and we're not going to be able to use the piggy bank to offset it again. So I think
Yeah.
that's where we both believe this is going.
And the only other thing I'll throw out here, is that, and I alluded to it earlier, we don't have a policy or policies in place as to utilization of the unassigned. All we have in place is a floor that if it got hit, a plan has to be put in place to refurbish.
Maybe the smarter motion would be, what is the floor right now for that?
8.5%.
Okay,
That's
8.5.
8.5% of our expenditure budget.
Many hundreds of thousands of dollars away from where it is now.
Which I would have to say, I hope to get to policy-wise and review at some point when we're past all of
Yeah,
this.
we're past all this.
Yeah. So Dan Smith, that motion you were getting ready to make, I think it was going to be around not being able to use any more of it until the debt is repaid.
Correct. Unless there is a warranted town emergency.
Which is not budget expenditures necessarily.
No.
Right? It could be a national.
Yeah.
I like that path. That way that holds our feet to the fire as the elected officials to make sure it gets paid back. and knowing, and everybody on the call knows that we're not spending any more of it until we pay this back.
And if
Oh,
part of the
sorry, Ann.
discussion here, go ahead.
If we were to pass the motion saying that we couldn't spend anything more out of the fund until it was repaid back, can we go back at a later date and nullify that motion if we had to?
You know, one of the things you could do is just keep it within the boundaries of the fiscal year. Time-wise.
I think the thoughts are then, Dan, wouldn't it be that we have next budget and we can do it again? So I think, isn't it, that would be true, right? If we wanted to make another motion, maybe it's a new board, maybe it's not us, but to change that line of thinking. I mean, that's possible, yeah.
Mike Urgo, you had something?
I mean, what you guys are talking about is really, I mean, a motion is one thing where it's in minutes and you're talking about it. Minutes are many minutes and many boards and they're hard to find. What you should think about is a policy, as Dan just said, if that's something you want to entertain. And even further, a potential ordinance, if it's something that you guys really want to look at. So I think those are the things that I don't believe that's a conversation for now or during the budget cycle, in my opinion, but I think what you're talking about are certainly good things to have some good debate about. And I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think policy would help take care of the concerns that we are trying to address, but you know, we're not there yet.
Yeah. And some of these motions and this language, I'm telling you, it gets me real close to being able to support something that we've been talking about. But I think I would certainly like to see this motion in some form come through and some assurances to townspeople that we're not using this as a way to put a Band-Aid on our budget year in and year out.
Oh, maybe the smart thing would be to make a motion to go out there and state that we take an action as a board within the next 6 months to revise the policy and procedures for the floor of the undesignated fund.
That doesn't offer some any assurances to voting members here tonight or next week for our budget this cycle, though, right? I mean, it's a good thing to in the future.
Paul, you're kind of knocking it around in your head.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
What should the wording be on Dan's motion that
I mean, I like where we're going.
kind of nails down?
Well, I'm kind of, you know, we've been beating this around the bush. You know, 5 of us last week voted for it, saying that, you know, we want to repay it. Then, you know, we came back today and said, well, the minutes, and we want more wording in it to make sure that we cover ourselves, that the debt gets paid back. Well, we need to come up with some wording.
All right, there's 2 pathways here to develop the articulation of your motion, or to come back to Mike Anderson's motion that has the potential of being amended in the minutes, where all he said is, you know, with intent that the drawdown be repaid, you know, without any schedule, without any timeline.
Yeah, there's no compliance factor with that. I guess that's
No.
the best way to say it. So it's soft,
Basically,
right?
You basically have an open debt of $200 and some odd $1,000 sitting there, and it could go sitting there for 12 years and not get ever repaid. There needs to be a sunset on that.
Well, you know, any savings that happens is automatically de facto going into the unassigned.
All right.
So the only thing to kind of put a clamp on it is to say that there will not be a utilization of the unassigned until that is replenished. I mean, I don't know how else to get to it.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that the undesignated fund cannot be used until the funds have been replenished.
You need that amount, was it $232,000 or something like that?
Yeah, wherever the figure is.
Are you going to add unless it's an emergency, like a natural disaster?
If there's a national disaster or a town emergency.
May I make a suggestion?
Go ahead, Mike.
How about the motion says, we do not use it unless there's a unanimous approval by the Board of Finance. That would require every single person on this board to say there's an absolute need for the funds to be used.
I kind of like that.
So do I. That gets us
Yeah,
there,
I
Mike.
like that.
That's the attorney. Yeah, right.
Super
All right,
majority.
You okay with that wording, Dan?
I am good with that wording.
Okay.
Mike,
All right,
Do you have it in, or do you need to?
put the
reread?
wording for me together again, please.
Go ahead, Dan.
The undesignated fund will will not be used until the debt is being paid in full, unless national disaster or emergency for the town. If it's going to be used, unanimous board of the Board of Finance needs to vote on it.
Okay, what I would say, and I hate to interject. Dan,
Wordsmith it up a little bit.
Yeah, take out the emergency piece.
Mhm.
Yep.
yeah, and just
Just go-
unanimous
And just
consent.
have
Yeah, Board of Finance.
unanimous.
Keep it simple
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
and
And
put
rather
the
than, I
200
would say draw down.
$225,000,
Yep.
$232.
Yeah.
Make sure the
Yeah.
number's in there.
Yeah, and just read it back to us to make sure.
All right, the undesignated fund cannot be used further until the $225,232 is replaced in full, unless there is unanimous agreement by the Board of Finance.
Now, the only thing I would like to add is, I don't want to have the repayment to be back on the backs of the taxpayers. It should be based off the drawdown of the budgets, the end of the year budgets, or school, it's some form that is not going to go. We're not going to say, hey, we're going to tax the taxpayers by 2 mils to put them to make the undesignated fund whole again. What is everybody's thought on that one?
So what are you saying, that we might suggest a tax increase to repay
No, what-
the undesignated?
What I don't want is to have a tax increase to say, hey, we're $100,000 away from it. We're just going to raise it, 0.5 mils, and we're going to wipe the debt out, but we're going to put it on the backs of the taxpayers. It should be back, based off the give backs of the general government and Board of Ed.
Well, I think this body would decide that, right? So I don't think we would do that. Is that? Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't be in favor of that.
I just don't want that to be lost in translation.
I don't think we're going to get unanimous support for a motion, Dan, if that was the case.
Okay.
I agree. Okay, so we
Okay.
got. And I think we've discussed this to death.
Yep.
And so I would call a vote.
Can I have a second?
Oh, yeah, Paul Simon did second that from. the
Actually, not this one. I think Mike owns this one.
Mike Anderson?
I made the motion.
Nobody seconded it.
There it is.
Oh, Paul, you reneged.
Wow,
I
thank
did only because Mike made it real. So I think Mike's
All
going to
right,
say.
so Mike has got the second. All right, so for the vote, again, Mike, do Do you have something before
I
we?
don't
come
have
to discussion?
anything because I don't have the answer, but I will, for the protection of the Board of Finance, check on the legality of what you are acting on. I'll report back to you next week on that. I don't know that there's anything wrong with what you're doing, but I want to make sure for your own protection that there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. So,
You know, if that's the case, we could table it until next week for the vote.
I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to know. I mean, you have an attorney on your board, and if but he's not the right kind of attorney for this one, I don't think. So.
The only thing I would say,
I'm concerned about the unanimous, which, you know, in boards, generally, you don't need a unanimous vote for something to pass. I'm concerned about the fact that it's taxpayers' money that you're putting limitations on the access of. So I just don't know. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. If you want to table it, that's fine. And if you send me an email with this motion, I will get it to the attorney and have them give an opinion on it. Or if you want to pass it, and then certainly I can report back next week. I wanted to speak up and.
Okay, Dan, it's your motion.
Dan Spring, we have control over the undesignated fund, correct?
That is correct.
So it would be just basically on the parliament, basically the voting of, you know, versus simple majority over, 100% of the board going along with it.
Yeah.
You know,
The only thing I would add to that, and it kind of blends in with what Mike is saying, is that any expenditure out of the unassigned can be approved by the Board of Finance, but then has to meet the rule of the 20,000, beyond which has to go to a town meeting.
Right. So are you saying that offers
So
some protections, I guess?
Well, no, it says that we're creating a motion that could be contrary to utilization of funds over $20,000, even though they're going to the unassigned.
Yeah, Dan, I would still like to put it for a vote and then have it put forth to the lawyers.
Yeah, worst case, I guess, if it comes back and we've done something unknowingly incorrect, it would null the vote.
Sure. Okay. So do we all agree with that? Mike Anderson, you got another note there? You're on mute, Mike. We still don't have you. Still don't have you.
I hear you.
Unplug from the computer, perhaps? No.
Mouth's moving, no sound. No.
I can hear Dan Spring. Can I hear Dan Smith?
Yep,
Okay. You can hear me. I can.
he's unmuted.
Yeah, I don't see his mic.
Somehow, Mike, you've got yourself on mute. Carolyn,
I heard some static.
Christine Diaz, are you seeing anything from your end?
I can't hear him, but I can see everyone else and hear everyone else.
Yeah, there's no activity on his microphone on the control panel end. So Mike, I don't know if your headphones died or what, but.
Can you hear us, Mike? Just nod your head. Okay, all right, that's odd.
You can call in the phone number if you can't get your audio to work on your computer. If you want to take a quick second and call in the phone number and put in the access code.
It was good for 2 hours and 50 minutes, Mike.
I hope that wasn't a drop the mic move.
It was a good one. I felt it was getting close here. Is there any chat function where you could, it costs a lot to type that in, I guess, take a long time.
We disabled the chat function because that's how people were Zoom bombing. So
Wait, that's a
it
thing?
never happened to our town, but that was just how people were getting in, and that's also how they were sending bad links and stuff. So we just disabled the whole function to make it
Oh,
not-
that's a thing then. Okay, all right.
just eliminate that whole possibility.
Gotcha. Zoom bombing. Let me go on mute so I can laugh about that.
I see Mike dialing his phone, throwing his earbuds down in frustration.
Oh, he's going Bluetooth now. Look at that.
Can you hear me?
Yay.
Yes.
I forgot what I was going to say. I haven't actually. I think I would prefer if we're going to come back, unless we're voting on everything tonight. You know, if we're going to vote on everything tonight, I'm willing to vote on this. If we're tabling, vote till next week. There's no harm in tabling this too, for our protection, just to make sure that we're getting proper advice on someone who knows municipal law, which is not this kid.
So he brings up the notion, would everyone be comfortable with this caveat, the motion that we can move forward with other things that we've discussed, which would be the 2.5 to Board of Ed, which would be the addition of a per diem person in the Board of Selectmen budget.
I guess the only curveball for me would be that if the opinion came back saying that we couldn't do what we just discussed, you have to have that information before we can vote for the 2.5 or whatever it's going to be. So maybe he's right. Again, attorney speak. Maybe it is correct to wait for the whole shooting match to get sorted.
What about what we talked about as far as putting the revenues in? I mean, just to show our intention that if there was any monies left, that they would be put in, you know, to offset that, whether they came from the Board of Ed returning the money or the Board of Selectmen, or from revenues from being a school choice.
So I think what I heard was that that's all gonna, I mean, the school of choice certainly goes in there without a doubt. But the dollars that I was trying to put a value on from either Board of Selectmen or Board of Ed, they're gonna come back. They might be $2, they might be $200,000. So I think they said that that's the intent, but their intent is to spend that money if they have a need. So I'm not sure how that verbiage goes in there.
But can we say it must, you know, it should be put back first before they show like revenues in their budget for a school of choice? So, I mean, if they can come up with money from their, you know, if there's money left over, for example, like this year where they didn't have to plow a lot of snow, you know, if that money is going back in and that would offset this amount. And then if the school of choice, you know, brings in revenues in excess of that, you know, then, do you know what I mean? Where then it could be added in as revenues to their budget rather than just going into, I don't know, just asking the question.
No,
Dan,
I got you.
Dan, there's still a motion on the table, and I believe has it been seconded yet, or?
Yes, Mike Anderson seconded the motion.
I would like for it
Then
to
it's a
go.
matter of going to a vote or tabling it to get legal opinion.
I would prefer to have it to go to a vote, and then if it has to come out, it has to come out. But at least we have some direction. We would have at least accomplished something.
All right, if you're comfortable with that vote, and Mike, and I have to come back to Mike Anderson's question, would you be willing to approve the 2.5 and the addition into the selectmen's budget for one per diem firefighter?
I probably would, yeah.
Okay. And again, just so you know the numbers, it kind of puts us back to what it would look like if it were a 2.85 increase for Board of Ed, which hypothetically would move us to a projected mill rate of 0.89. Yep, Paul.
So just to hop off what Dan Smith was saying. So Dan, if this comes back, the attorney says we can't do this,
Well, it's null and void.
but we're saying we're gonna, but your vote for the Board of Ed budget is not. It's gonna be a
It's
different vote.
contingent. I would want to make it contingent.
So I would think that we would just want to vote on your motion, me personally,
Yes.
your motion only. I would not want to vote on the rest of the budgets until we were sure that we're doing things the right way.
Then table it.
Yeah.
Why would I need to table it?
Because
Well, and then we're, then,
It's completely separate.
yeah, but then we're not trying to undo the motion, you know.
Well, if the motion doesn't go through because of legality, it doesn't go through, it doesn't go through. We're right back to where we started.
Yeah,
Oh,
but the point to all of that, though, is that becomes a record in the minutes where we have made a motion that is in violation of the way we should be conducting ourselves, and I don't think we want that.
No.
No, and we would have had another motion, to Mike's point, later on in tonight's meeting to vote for something that would not be null by our mistake we made necessarily.
Right. All right.
Just because of the legality of it, and for us as a board, when we do get the response back from the lawyer, I would like to see the response.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. You see my point, though, because anything that we vote on as a motion absolutely has to be in the minutes.
Okay, well, we can table it till the next. How long, Mr. Lawyer? How long do you think that would take to get back?
Mike would answer that. I think we'd have an answer by our next meeting next week. Mike, Virgo?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure he can get me an answer on that by your meeting next week, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and as long as us as a board would be able to get the answer back on that in writing.
All right. Folks, we're approaching 10 o'clock, and we've had some public that have stayed on. So in consideration of time and them, I'd like to table the minutes and open it up for public comment. Is that okay with everybody? Just a consensus?
Yes.
Just because of the time here. All right, so we're going to table minutes, previous minutes, and open for public comments.
Okay, so if anybody's on the phone, to unmute yourself again, it's *6. If you are on video, just also unmute yourself. There should be a button on your screen. Dan?
Dan, quick one. Are we going to still also talk about the other parts of the agenda tonight?
The future strategies.
Yes.
Because there's nothing there that, can't wait until next week. I'd rather table that. So thank you for bringing that up. And I know that in terms of public hearing, town meeting, we kind of talked about that. The only thing we didn't talk about is filling the Board of Finance vacancy, which has just been a week. So I think rather than discuss that tonight, I'd rather leave it to next week.
I would prefer to have some discussion on the vacancy at least.
Yeah, I would be in favor of a few minutes around that topic as well.
Just a few. We're not going to go in hours into it, but can we flip flop the public comments and then do the vacancies after that?
What do we
That's
have?
proper.
So where was I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Where did the vacancy discussion happen? Was that at this point or was it after public comments?
It was in future strategies.
Which was that was before public comments.
Yeah, that was before previous minutes, before public comments. I don't want to go into an in-depth on that tonight because it could take some time. And that we've only been a week out. I think we've asked for submission of applicants. And that notification only happened recently, even on the Thursday or Friday, so I mean, it's just business days from where we are. So,
So did we didn't, as a board, ask for applications of this?
it was put out in the Board of Selectmen that there was a vacancy on Board of Finance. And that, as I said in our last meeting, because Mustafa was an elected Democrat, that protocol, not mandate, but protocol would be to discuss it with the chair of the Democratic Town Committee. And if in fact there were candidates that they would like us to consider. And in that thought is try to keep a balance on the board between the two parties. And even though that's not a mandate, minority representation is that we only need 4 for a quorum, but it can't be 4 Republicans. So, you know.
I sent forward information that came from our actual Board of Finance handbook, which states the process, and it doesn't come from the selectmen, it comes from the Board of Finance. And
No,
Ann is an alternate.
the Board of Selectmen, aren't choosing a candidate for the vacancy. It was just mentioned in the weekly update that there was going to be a vacancy on the Board of Finance. That's all.
I understand, but since Anne is already on the Board of Finance and she's acting as a secretary and she's participated in all of our discussions and she's contributed, doesn't it make sense to bring it up to have her fill the vacancy? I mean, I'm unaffiliated.
Carolyn, it's one of the options. That's why it's going to take some, in my opinion, some discussion, because Anne is an elected alternate. And she's a Republican, which means that, if we were at least to consider a balance, and no candidate may come forward, we're undoing that unwritten word that we try to keep a balance on the board.
So Dan, has there been any, I know there was
You can
one
see how
application-
this discussion is getting more lengthy.
Yeah, no, for sure, but I just, the process, I know we saw a note, you and I, from the clerk, there was an applicant. Has there been any more applications? That you know?
In that it's only been a few business days, I haven't talked, I know there's one.
Yeah.
But, as of either yesterday or today, I have not talked to the town clerk.
Okay. So I would like to suggest that we have a special meeting prior to the next meeting, if we could, please. And I think you have to call that to make this thing happen.
Again, my thought there, I don't have a sense of rush there, because to bring on somebody else other than Anne, for instance, that, they're in a position where we're in the throes of all the things we talked about tonight that they have no knowledge of, which means that we would have to yield to the alternate for a vote. So it doesn't make sense to put the rush on in 1 week's time. Yes, Mike Anderson.
Yeah, I'm in favor of, obviously we're in the middle of this particular season that Ann has been a part of. And I think, in all fairness to our past protocol of trying to have a balanced board, that we should have a longer time vetting who is going to sit on this board for the next several years. And that doesn't take away from all of the efforts that Ann has put in being an active part of this board right now to take us through this season. So, and I think we should end it there. We have people that have been waiting for 3 hours to talk, I think, so I think we need to move this on to public comment, and we will ultimately make the decision on this board, guys. So, of who gets put into the vacancy. So, but I don't think we should rush it, and I think we should keep in mind of the overall maintaining a policy of a balanced board.
Yeah, let's look at the submissions, and I would have to say, given 3 business days isn't enough. It's not.
So, yeah, no, I'm hearing you about that, but I think I'd have to insist, if I could, please, to have this election prior to our next meeting, and really,
It's
My
not going
intent
to
is-
happen. It's not going to happen, Paul. I will not call a special meeting prior to our next meeting. Will not.
you're not going to.
No. No, because I
So is that
think,
our only avenue, is for you to call that, Dan?
yes,
So I,
because I think in fairness, we have to bring priority to the budget process that we have in place right now. And as painful as it is, I'm hoping that we're making progress and that we have, and thankfully, as a very committed alternate that can be seated for votes. And we have no threat of lack of quorum either at this point. Everyone's been pretty good about attendance.
so I'd just like those minutes to show that I'm asking for this as a vice chairman, and you're refusing to do that. And I'm very uncomfortable with that, knowing that Ann's here. I fully plan for her to
Okay,
be seated.
Paul, you're not bringing any different definition to that. So why is there a rush on your part?
I'd like to have Ann seated as a full voting member permanently now. There's no reason to wait. She has been the alternate. She is elected. Anybody that might apply is not an elected official. They're just going to be the choice of us, the five of us.
Which is what the
think-
statute says,
Right, which is fine. Yeah.
which is what the statute says.
And Ann is elected. This new person would not be. So
I understand that, but the statute says that we decide, and I don't see why waiting to see what other candidates are out there. No offense to Ann.
Because we don't have to, Mike. The statute doesn't say that.
The statute also does not state that you have to have, you cannot have all Republicans to make a quorum or all Democrats.
No, I know.
Quorum
I
is-
know. I read all the statutes, Dan. You can have 4,
Yes,
but is it good policy? Is it good policy
our chairman stated that it,
for a town that's got
we're elected officials. So what? We're elected officials. A quorum is a quorum.
Yeah, but it can't be a quorum of 4 Republicans.
Yes, it can.
No.
Show, I would want to have, I would want to see the ordinance or the state statute that states that you cannot have 4 Republicans or 4 Democrats.
Hold on, I'm looking up the statute.
I was endorsed by the Democrats because no one came forward.
Yeah, the way it reads, you could have 4 Republicans. However, if you utilize the alternate, which you could, because not everyone is seated, then you don't have minority representation. So that's the issue.
So if you had to have an alternate seated for a meeting, it couldn't be a unanimous
Republican.
party.
Yeah, so let's say, we have 4 Republicans, but our alternate is there. The alternate rightfully could be seated in a vote. However, if they're all Republicans, there's no minority representation. Can't happen.
Okay. So you wouldn't seat the alternate necessarily if you had the quorum.
Right, but the statutes also read, if you have a vacancy of elected members, that the alternate can be seated. And, and not to do that, you're saying to the alternate, you're not important to the process. So we're gonna, I think we've had the discussion, we're gonna move it to our next meeting. But it's been so noted on this agenda that, there is a concern there to fill that vacancy. So we've agreed to table previous minutes and we'll open it for public comments. And Christine Diaz, if you can help me with that.
Yep, I have someone on the phone that unmuted themselves when we started this earlier. So if your phone number ends with 8133, you can go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
It's Laura Mello again. To coin a member of the Board of Finance, we are definitely in the middle of a pandemic, and no one understands this more than our young children. They're not with their peers. They're not even being educated with their trained teachers. They're very sad, they're emotional, and they're worried that they or their family members are going to get COVID-19. This is their reality. It's not going to change in the fall. They're the ones that are going to need more support, not less next year. And that's what you guys are deciding on. Let's get the focus back on track. To do less is short-sighted. The suggestion to custodians when we're in the middle of a pandemic just demonstrates the ignorance that goes into increased sanitizing required in keeping our schools safer, learning our children next year. In the middle of a pandemic, you need more. There's a lot of unknowns. I get that. We are in unprecedented times. Now's the time to show integrity, the priorities and values, the ones that we teach our children every day. It's been super frustrating to listen to the rhetoric that's going on during this meeting today. There were 3 proposals brought to you by the Board of Education. None of them have been passed. I love our fire personnel. I'd vote yes to both. But that's not what was on the table. The Board of Ed budget was. I'm not in favor of holding our children's education support hostage by the unknowns of the state or the fire personnel budget. No one knows what will happen, but we all know our children are going to continue to need education. They're going to need sports. They're going to need their specialists next year. Those requirements are not going to stop. There are studies that show that sports increase cognitive development. It lowers both mental health and behavioral issues in children. Our specialists support our School of Distinction designation. Each year you need to expect an increase in the Board of Ed budget. If you don't get one, it's simple math. It's not Common Core math. It's simple math because the union contracts that include increased wages, benefits that by way of the Board of Finance agreed were reasonable, they increase every year. So if you get a 0% budget, it's because they have already cut out all of the ancillaries that are in their budget to make up that difference. It's simple math. Look, I trust the Board of Education to make good faith decisions. They've done their due diligence. They've accommodated every request that you've given them. The timeline for going to the town for a vote, I completely agree with that, but you have to come to a consensus. You've got to come to an agreement. You've got to vote on something. Please pass the one that benefits the kids the most. Do not balance the town budget on the backs of the children. Making the budget contingent or the decision contingent on a unanimous vote on fire personnel, it doesn't align with your objectives to the strategy of being a school of choice. It just doesn't. Either vote for the 2.5 or the 2.85, get off your seat and make a difference. Thank you for your time. It's 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate your input. So noted.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I think Brian has unmuted himself, if I'm wrong.
No,
I think-
I'm here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Brian.
Okay, it's Brian Rathbun. Usually I only get 2 minutes, so what I did is I wrote a letter and I wrote it to the Board of Finance members, I wrote it to the Board of Selectmen, and I wrote to the head of the Board of Education. And I believe there's only maybe 4 people that received them. And I tried to send them 3 times. I'd like to encourage the members of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education to reach out to maybe those 4 people that got them. And one person was Carolyn, one person was Christine Wagner, and Bob Carlson and Nita Kincaid got my letter. And like I say, it's a little long to read. I know it's late, but I just like to have everybody try to get the letter and read it anyways.
Brian, if you
I
send
got
it
it.
to me
I got it
tomorrow,
4
I'll
times.
forward it out to everybody.
Okay, I'll try to get it to you tomorrow then.
Brian,
thank
thank you very much. We'll get some discovery going there. Yeah.
Okay,
Next.
yep, thanks.
Anyone else? Christine?
Not seeing anybody right now.
Christine Wagner.
Christine Wagner, I just heard her. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hopefully you've gotten copies of emails from other parents as well. I don't discount them for dropping off the line at this late of an hour, 4th week in a row. All I have to say is the lack of trust in our presentations and our decisions is really going to really break down the communication here. I'm not really understanding what's happening. If you guys think we're playing games with our numbers and we're just threatening because you think, and we knew this on Monday night. When we cut the budget, they said, all they're gonna say is, well, you could cut it. We knew you had it. Why don't you just cut more? And we said, no, they're gonna realize that we're coming to them with a good faith number, that we did the work, but no, that's the comments we heard again tonight. I'm really disappointed. I can't even express to you how disappointed I am in this Board of Finance. I've been doing this long enough, and this is just not something I've ever experienced. I think it's going to have some fallout with what our relationships are between the boards. I don't think that you guys are thinking about all the taxpayers. There's 6 of you. Your job is to bring it to hearing to hear from all of the taxpayers. And I'm asking you again, bring it to hearing, let the taxpayer weigh in, and bring it back and make decisions based on public input. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Christina.
And Brett has something too.
For some reason, my video is blocked by the host, but it says
Not intentional.
you can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
I just clicked the button. You should be okay.
Okay. All right. Just in regards to the filling of the vacancy, I don't believe you are correct, Dan, that 4 members can't be seated in a quorum. That's minority representation is based on the makeup of the committee in the Board of Finance. But just to bring it to your attention, Dan, that, well, you say you want to bring this equal because it was a Democrat vacancy. I have to bring it back to, I'll start in 2012 when it was a Republican vacated, and you were the chairman of the board. You put in Mike Urgo actually over Ed McGowan back then, not looking to fill that spot with the same party. Again, that happened in 2013. You filled the role that was left by Brent Woodward, and you were seated in a Democrat spot. Then a role came open from a Republican that you then seated Brent Woodward back to the board. Right, it happened in succession over a few month period. And then the following year is when the board had a no contact, a vote of no confidence in you and asked you to resign as chairman. So I think your statements that you've been making regarding parties and making sure everything's fair and not seating an alternate as the full member of the board because you want to see what else is out there, it didn't happen in the past. It didn't make sure it was a party of the same party as long as minority representation was met. Also, when you were seated in replace of Brent Woodward, it happened at a regular meeting. It did not happen at a special meeting called for by the chairman of the board. So I'm concerned about which rules we choose to follow and which rules we don't, depending on what's convenient at the time. I believe Ann Aiken being at all these meetings has been, I think she was at the most meetings out of anybody, to be honest with you. It seems that she should really be looked at and be seated as a full member, like Paul Simons asked for, as to have a special meeting prior to your next meeting to actually seat her, someone that is dedicated to the board. Now, as on EDC, we just had a vacancy, and we had a vacancy with an alternate with a full member, but there was an alternate available that wanted the full membership. The selectmen basically said, we saw that the alternate did not put the time in, hasn't attended the meetings. So we feel like it's best to put the new person in that spot. But in this case, Ann's been dedicated, and it should be a no-brainer to put her in. So I just want to make that apparent. And also I want to make it crystal clear that this hasn't been followed before. There is no statute that says it has to be a Democrat seated. It didn't happen when Robin Rohr left as a elected Republican treasurer. The selectmen chose a Democrat to fill that seat because the wording was, it wasn't in the state statute that that's how it had to happen. And they say seated someone else instead. So I'm hearing mixed messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. I think as we move forward, we're trying to do the right thing and give consideration to all payers, taxpayers, regardless of what their affiliation is. But in considering trying to bring a balance to the board, there's never going to be a situation where you're weighted all Republican, and it doesn't matter what the Democrat has to say, they're going to be outvoted. So, it's just a consideration, Brett. And we've only been a couple of business days out of the vacancy left by Mustafa.
I understand that, but if you're saying party doesn't matter in all these other contexts that we talk about, that it's not about party, it's about how we work and how we work together, then your argument about filling the seat and making it party based doesn't feel valid, because there are many Republicans that agree with Mike Anderson and he's a Democrat, and there's vice versa. There's Democrats that agree with Republicans on the board. So I think saying that, you're making a balance because of the letter after their name and not the work they do is not right.
Well, Brett, I've got to bring you to task a little bit. When we had an alternate that was very committed and a Republican who made all the meetings during the last election cycle, she was not considered by the caucus.
She was considered at the caucus, actually. You brought her up for a vote, and she didn't get the votes to move forward. But there was also, we won't get into some of the details of how you got elected back on this board, and that we were putting someone forward and you came in at the last minute and asked for the nomination from the Republican Party, and it was given. But we do our best, and that's why as Republicans, we do have a caucus where every Republican votes for the names of who they endorse to put forward. We're the only party in town that does it that way, and we make it fair that way by putting those names up for a vote at a caucus of all registered Republicans.
So what's your point to, the rush as opposed to, 1 week?
Well, the point to the rush is that your vice chair called for it, and you have an active alternate that's been active since her time started on here. So
It's not on the agenda, Brett, right now for tonight. I don't think it's on the agenda for tonight.
No, you're absolutely right, Mike. It isn't on the agenda for tonight, but there was a discussion regarding it tonight, and Paul Simons asked to put it to a special meeting. You can appoint at that special meeting or choose not to appoint at that special meeting. That's the purpose of that meeting, is to discuss it and maybe appoint someone or not. But to just blow over that and not even hold. So if you look at the minutes from back in the years when Dan was appointed back on the board of finance, it was done they called a special meeting at 7:30 and their normal meetings started at 7:45. So it was a way to discuss it. And if for some reason you didn't get voted on, then you didn't get voted on. But I think Paul's asking for you guys to have a special meeting to at least talk and then potentially vote Ann on as a full member.
the call for a special meeting, certainly is something that's going to happen. However, in the heat of our discussions on this budget prep, I don't see that a special meeting has to be called between now and next Wednesday when Ann can be utilized and seated.
And that's your decision as chair. It's just surprising that when your vice chair asks for something, you don't even talk about making it a vote to see if other members of your board would be interested in.
Brett,
entertaining that.
I think you're stepping a little outside of bounds here. I don't want to get into the discussion more. I'd be happy to have a phone conversation with you.
I actually sent an email on May 1st asking that Ann be, considered for the position. I read the rules and I provided them. So this wasn't the first request tonight to have this conversation or have this added to our agenda.
So, yeah, thank you. I did see that too. So is it appropriate to make a motion to?
It's still public comment.
I'm sorry, who was that speaking?
Yeah,
It's Christine Wagner. She's correct. It is still public comment.
It's public comments, Paul.
Okay.
Paul, as my vice chair, I'm surprised by, this contrary position.
Yeah, I am too, Dan.
Given that it's just been a couple of days.
No, I understand the process too. And I think that I don't like what I'm seeing either. So let's put it that way. And maybe you and I can have a telephone conversation.
I'd love to have that because there's some things there that I know that I'd love to discuss with you.
Fantastic.
Okay, I have a virtual hand raised by Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, this is actually Sarah Nelson. Chris is my husband. He's right next to me. It's okay. Zoom. This is my first Board of Finance meeting. It's actually my first town board meeting ever, so it was very educational. Thank you. I would like to thank the board in terms of the amount of thought and process that goes into the deliberations that are important to the town. My husband and I moved here almost 6 years ago, exactly with my 9-month-old daughter. We did pick this town because of the schools. We were very excited. My daughter is now in 2nd grade. When she started kindergarten, I was alarmed by the fact that there were school rooms cordoned off due to PCPs in the environment. So I'm very grateful to the town for approving the remediation and the renovation so we could have, safe environment for our children. And I'm very obviously invested and will continue to be invested in the budget for the education going forward. I would say thank you both to the Board of Finance and the Board of Education for all the work they do. I know this is very difficult. And I certainly can understand, Carolyn, getting angry calls from parents must not be fun. So, I recognize that this is a monumental amount of work that you guys are all doing in service to the town. I would just say that I do agree with some of the comments that were made around the fact that, budget approved for education should stay with education. So it's a little concerning to hear comments about potentially pulling money away from the Board of Ed that was approved to be used for education. So I hope that those comments that were in favor of keeping that do stand. And I would just ask the board to also consider the appropriate amount of time to complete these types of deliberations. There's a lot of anxiety in the town with parents. And there's a lot of concern about, whether, regardless of what side you land on, whether it should be approved or shouldn't be approved, there's anxiety on both sides. So I do ask the board to consider this a priority in terms of focusing on making sure the Board of Ed decision can be made, put forward to the town for the hearing or whatever the subsequent processes are. And again, thank you so much for all of your work and your dedication here.
Thank you, Chris.
That's Sarah.
So it's all good. You can call me whatever.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sarah. Anybody else, Christine?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Dan, may I speak now?
Pam, I think just flashed up.
Yep.
Yes.
Attorney.
And Sarah actually segued me because I've been listening to this, and you're right. I've had a lot to say throughout this meeting, and you know, I'm glad that I actually had to wait till the end because I had a lot of time to really think about and not react emotionally to some of the things that were said. But I guess at the end of all of this, aside from being a Board of Ed member, when I originally started on the School Modernization Committee, the purpose of the committee, as you recall, and Mike Anderson would recall as well, we really looked at what were our options. And before we decided to even build the facilities that we built, we were deciding between sending our students out of district and keeping them in district and supporting homeschools. And I guess that my concern then was that, and I stated this very clearly on our committee, that if we were in a position where we were sending our children out of district, we were going to be at the whim of other districts to set the tuition rate and really impact our mill rate and ultimately our tax increases. So I know that that was a split decision, and that people, you know, going way back 3 and 4 years and long before that, were really on the fence with whether or not to support that vote. And I listened very carefully, and I took that role very seriously when I joined that committee. And that was at the forefront of my thinking, is that I wanted our town to be able to control where our kids were educated and ultimately how we could best protect our taxpayers. And I've heard it mentioned several times on both sides of the fence about representing all members of our community, which is who we're elected to represent. And now we sit here in a position where we can present not only state-of-the-art facilities that we should be extremely proud of, and I cannot wait to present the elementary school to those parents, but we're also in a position to generate income for our town. And we're debating whether or not to support the only budget that has been presented that will generate income and tax breaks to the citizens that we're elected to represent. So I completely understand what Carolyn's position is, and I want to be able to support that as well. And our first responders and all of that, I think that's a great initiative. I really do. But we have to look at how we're generating income to this town, and it has to be diverse. And I think it's the responsibility of the Board of Ed and every single board and committee of this town to look at how are we enhancing and protecting the things that we value. We value our community as a whole, and education is a huge income generator, whether or not we, you know, agree with or disagree with the spending of the Board of Education. The bottom line is they have full control over what the taxpayers vote for. My reason for bringing up the whole motion last week was certainly not to pick that apart, but to Dan's point of somebody picking that motion apart, my concern was that we need to think about, well, we move that motion, but how are we going to refund that? And the town has done a great job with making sure that money was available. That's like a way bigger picture. And so I would really want to refocus the Board of Finance to think about what our overall community goal is, and that's to support each other, to generate revenues of income to this town, and to trust fellow board members who are elected to fiscally responsibly commit to a budgeting process that really addresses the needs of our citizens in this community. And that includes generating income that can represent and really create tax breaks and support to the citizens who are our seniors, who can't maybe, you know, support and pay for the reevaluation. And I know that's one of the income generators that we've talked about, but that ultimately is going to come from taxpayers. Dan, we need to think about revenues coming into the town, and the Board of Ed is very cognizant of that. If we don't support the Board of Ed budget, which is, I'm telling you, at a bare bones minimum, we cannot in good faith go to these towns and ask those parents to send their kids to our town when we cut essential programs that make our schools what they are. And so I'm not speaking as a Board of Ed member. I'm thinking as a taxpayer, be reasonable, put party aside. This is not about that. It's about what is fiscally responsible and what is in the direction of a bigger picture for this town and moving us forward, and supporting the people who can't afford to live in our town if we don't do these things to support them. It's not about cutting. It's about generating income and revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And again, as you know, Pam is the chair of the School Modernization Program and also sits on the Board of Ed. Thank you, Pam. Anything else, Christine, that you see? Oh, Brett?
Brett. I didn't realize I was muted.
No problem. Just a question. I know I'm in support of the 2.5% that the Board of Ed put forward and the per diem firemen. I think that's a fantastic compromise. But since this is going to the town attorney to see if what you presented was legal, is there a way that we can get a response from them about the RISA account at the same time? Because it seems like it's been 4 weeks since it's been with the town attorney. So I was surprised when Mike said we should be able to get a response regarding.
Brett, that's only been with the town attorney for 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I was given it after, not the last meeting, but the meeting before that. The Board of Finance members had it prior, but it wasn't sent to me until after that meeting. So he does have it. He is reviewing it. But with everything going on, he has a lot on his plate and he doesn't just work for us. So.
And I
Right,
think
so that was my concern. So how are we going to get the answer to this question, which is actually delaying the vote in the Board of Ed budget by next Wednesday, if he's had the other decision for 2 weeks now? I'm just saying it'd be great if he can answer both at the same time, so you guys know where you stand on potentially allowing the Board of Ed to keep their money for education and use that accordingly, and then vote on the budget as presented so far.
I'll follow up with the town attorney again on that account.
Thank you.
I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, Dan Smith.
Dan Sprague, we had the ERISA account wording that went to the lawyer. When did that happen?
I had submitted information to all of the Board of Finance members relative to what the RISA account is all about. And I think Christine Diaz was just saying that it's been roughly 2 weeks that it's been submitted to the town attorney, and that I have asked her on several occasions if we had gotten a response back.
And Dan, to your response, we already had it go through our attorney and he wrote up a memorandum of understanding. I'm sorry, it's getting late. So it's already a state statute or whatever you call it. It's done in many, many, many districts. It's not something new. We already had something written up by our town attorney and we've sent that over weeks ago.
Was that forwarded to the town attorney, Christine Diaz?
But what we forwarded to the town attorney was what I received after the meeting 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And just so that was that paragraph that we had all been presented. Or
No,
shown.
this is the document from Christine Wagner from the Board of Ed attorney for the official memorandum.
Okay. So I'm happy to put that on the agenda for next week. Let's see if we've got an answer. All right. Anything else?
I'm
Thank
not
you.
seeing anybody.
Okay, I would like to move for adjournment. Do I have a second?
You do.
Paul? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And that I would put our time at 10:40. It's been a long night. Thank you, everybody. And we'll reconvene 1 week from this evening.
Good night, folks.
Good night,
Good night,
all.
good night, Mary Ellen.
I love it.
I'm not as mad this week.
Me either.